Hello friends, welcome back to Dungeon Design in Zelda, which is a series that is exactly what it sounds like. We've completed Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, and The Wind Waker, and with the recent release of Skyward Sword HD on the Nintendo Switch, it's time to skydive headfirst into a brand new adventure, or a new old adventure. You get the idea. Let's hop into it. Skyward Sword is notoriously one of the franchise's most divisive games, and while I've always enjoyed it personally, I've also been openly critical of it in the past, but probably not for the reasons you expect. The motion controls were never an issue for me. In fact, if you listen to the podcast, the Hylian Gamescast, that I co-host with my pal Game Over Jesse, you'll know that I've heavily criticized the game's world structure, its hand-holding, and its constant habit of just outright interrupting gameplay with a barrage of dialogue and text, most often coming from your companion character, Fi. Fi? I always say Fi. Like Wi-Fi. So when the remake was announced, I was feeling some trepidation about these aspects of the game, and if they would even be addressed. The good news is that overall, yes, Nintendo definitely has heard the fan feedback and have streamlined many of the game's more irritating moments by either removing unnecessary dialogue or just making it outright optional. Heck, even those motion controls are optional now. The ironic thing about this is that with Fi's hints now being optional, I find myself more willing to actually call upon her. Despite the end results being the same, that being her talking a lot, the very fact that the game lets you ignore her if you want to makes all the difference. It's a small change, but there is a distinct shift in my own mentality about Fi. I guess it's because I'm now the one pressing the button to listen to her, instead of her halting me in my footsteps and interrupting me to talk. It also helps that the text speed has been dramatically increased too. They even make certain tutorial things optional, like she will just ask you if you want her to explain the dowsing mechanic. You can say no, and then that's it. Thank you. In fact, aspects like dowsing were things I really didn't like about the original, that I find myself coming around to more in this version of the game. Since they aren't forcing it down your throat constantly, it's easy to just briefly switch over to it, look around, and then move on. There's many more small tweaks which come together to make what is, in my opinion, something greater than the sum of their parts. Something worth noting as well is how this game overall differs from other Zelda titles. I feel like Wind Waker strikes an excellent balance of open world and linear design, both inside and outside of its dungeons. Meanwhile, Breath of the Wild leans all the way into the open world design, and Skyward Sword leans all the way in the opposite direction, doubling down on its linear design. Now, neither is a bad thing in my opinion, they're just different from each other, but what this means for gameplay is that its larger hub areas are pretty limited. The world map itself gets sectioned into closed off provinces, which almost act like dungeons in their own right with how they're designed. The game works to constantly propel you forward through the story, and because of this design choice, many people may find themselves feeling limited in what they can do at certain points of the game. But as long as you go in understanding that this game is not Breath of the Wild, then you should be okay. Different games do different things, and that's okay. But if you love unraveling dungeons in Zelda, if you love puzzle solving and a constant flow of action, all wrapped up in a beautiful story, then Skyward Sword just might be the game for you. Because of its linear structure, the game does really well at setting up some wonderful set pieces as well as scaling its difficulty. Despite the many wonderful changes made to the HD version, it does still suffer from having Skyward Sword's long introduction. When I talked about games making us do our chores in previous videos, I really meant this stuff. The game is going to take some time to get going, and if I walk you through every detail of all of that, this video is going to get even longer than it already is. So let's just summarize. There's a wonderful prologue which describes how long ago there was a great war between the Demon King and his tribe and the surface dwellers, namely the goddess Hylia, who was the divine protector of a certain golden power. She defeated the demon tribe, and in order to protect said sacred power, she placed it and some of the inhabitants of the surface on an outcropping of land and sent it skyward, out of reach. In the present day, we meet Link and Zelda, childhood besties who are probably in love. That's pretty heavily implied in this game. Link is a student at the Knight Academy of Skyloft, and today is the day of their wing ceremony. But Link's rival, Groose, apparently kidnapped his big pet bird, and so you gotta go talk to some people, you get this sword, you go in a cave, you find your bird, you get a tutorial on flying, you participate in this wing ceremony, you catch this statuette twice, you jump here, you go flying with Zelda, a tornado attacks, you're separated, you have to tell your dad about it, then this spirit shows up, that is Fi, by the way, you gotta follow her around a bunch, then you get this fancy sword, this is the goddess sword, then you skyward strike this thing, you place the stone tablet in here, you go to bed, you change your clothes, you get a shield, and we can actually start adventuring now. Okay. That was like an hour of the game. And this is the trimmed down version. Boy, it's no wonder they made Breath of the Wild's tutorial the way they did. When we jump through the opening in the cloud barrier, we'll land on the surface at the ceiling grounds. We'll find this ceiling spike here, which is just a great moment, very atmospheric. And we'll meet this old lady inside the temple here. Rescue this Goron Gorko, he's a nice guy. Head through the Faron Woods, rescue some Kikwi's, get the slingshot, and obstacle course your way into the deep woods until you find this structure. You can open the door by using the slingshot you got on this gem switch on the ceiling, which opens the path to the game's first dungeon. Finally. Welcome to Skyview Temple. It's unclear the origins of this place. Fi states that it's been around since ancient times, but that's about it. Its age is made pretty clear though. Being located deep in the Faron Woods has lent itself to this structure being overgrown with vegetation. There's plenty of flora, mushrooms, heck, even entire trees sprouting their ways in and out of the rooms here. Much of the stonework is still intact, but there's large sections that have crumbled away, such as parts of the ceiling, these stairs, and this entire bridge being just gone. Whatever the case may be about the temple's origins, aside from it just being ancient, clearly nobody's been around to maintain the structure, and nature is reclaiming it. This design overall is great to me. The structure feels more believable as a temple with these symmetrical stairs and rooms, but its more gamey linear progression that makes you crisscross through the rooms can be explained by the structure's damage. It just makes the whole place feel more alive and real to me. I'm quite fond of the visual style of this place. I've always been fond of nature, and forest-themed areas in video games tend to be among my favorites. However, this game doesn't just give us swaths of green and brown and call it a day there. Because of the underground nature of this place and lack of sunlight, much of the pigmentation in these plants is washed out, giving us grass that's nearly white, and these bioluminescent mushrooms are all over the place, giving off a gentle glow. There's also some neat particle effects in the air. It's just a nice detail. Being called Skyview is interesting because it's entirely underground, and even the building exterior is at a low elevation in the farthest reaches of the dense forest. So why is it called Skyview Temple when a place up in the clouds would lend itself much better to that name? Is it the balcony up there? Well, it could also be that we are descended from the sky, and it's the first dungeon that we visit. But more interestingly is that it could be named that in reference to the prophecy sung by Zelda at the start of the game about a hero uniting Earth and sky. We'll touch more on that idea later on in the series, however, but one thing's for certain, this place holds importance for Zelda, and she came through here, which is why we have to explore this place, because we came down here trying to find her. That's the story here. I find Skyview a very interesting dungeon to examine. It's the game's starter dungeon, but since we've probably been playing for a couple of hours by the time that we reach here, we should be confident with simply controlling Link. Therefore, the dungeon does not need to act as a tutorial for us, so instead of teaching us, it can put our skills to the test, not only with combat, but also with Link's very movement options. Ideas like using the slingshot to unravel these vines, swinging from vines, and crawling through small spaces were all introduced to us in rather controlled conditions outside of the dungeon, but are all integrated into the dungeon design and expanded upon in much greater detail here. It's good stuff. Something that could have been done better though is conveyance with some of these puzzles. Like, this gem switch is pretty much in plain sight and it opens a door. That's fine by me. But then when the dungeon needs to be littered with little stone tablets to give you cryptic hints about opening doors, that kind of thing feels like it's born from either poor design in your puzzles or unnecessary hand-holding. In this case, it's actually more the latter. Finding a gem switch to open a door is just fine, but do we have to read about it, or can't we just explore and find out? Well, the good news is that technically you could ignore these stone tablets, they're just there if you want, but the game does funnel you towards them, so it feels like you have to read them in order to proceed. Ah well, the dungeon does ease up on that after the first few rooms in favor of more interesting exploration. The music in Skyview is a pretty good fit for this place. I gotta say overall that Skyward Sword has a fantastic soundtrack, making wonderful use of that big orchestra. But whereas we get these bombastic and amazing scores while flying and outside, this dark dungeon goes in a different direction, one that's better suited to exploring the cramped, isolated, claustrophobic spaces underground. There's this low section that underlines the entire track constantly, which is just outright eerie. Then this more sinister section comes in, and it's got that great danger just around the corner feel that fits the dungeon atmosphere to a T. What's interesting is that the different layers to the dungeon music will fade in and out depending on which rooms you're in. Some rooms will have it come in with the full track, while rooms like these narrow corridors and staircases will only use that low tense section. During normal gameplay, this would build naturally and is actually really well done, but if you just hang out in the doorways between these sections like this one, it can be mildly amusing. Okay, let's talk progression. We'll begin the dungeon in this narrow corridor with the staircase leading downwards. We'll be introduced to these spider webs right here in the entrance, which you can cut with your sword. We'll also be blocked by these trees here, which can be sliced apart. Again, a concept introduced outside. We'll wind our way down, eventually coming to a locked door. But if you slice these trees out of the way, we can find this gem switch here, which opens the door. Just watch out for the Deku Baba. Through the door, we'll find ourselves in this round room. There's a pedestal and this eyeball thing above the locked door. There is a stone tablet here with a hint, which just says to ask Fi for help. Thanks for that. Based on all of my prior Zelda experience, my first thought when I played this game 10 years ago was that I had to shoot the eyeball with the slingshot. But that's not it. What you'll actually want to do is make the eyeball dizzy by spinning your sword around a bunch. Okay, this opens the door and we can head on through, which takes us into the dungeon's central room. Or at least the first of two central rooms that this dungeon has. Watch out for these little spiky bomb things, which are apparently called burrs, and the Deku Babas that hang from the ceiling. From this room, there are 5 doors, not counting the one we just came through. Though on this ledge, we can make a shortcut from the entrance hallway back into the dungeon. Just watch out for the wall chillas here. Oh, heebie-jeebies. Otherwise, 2 of the 5 doors are actually on balconies out of reach, so forget about those 2 for now. All 3 of these accessible doors are locked. The one dead ahead needs a key, and if we look around, we'll see a gem switch directly above the eastern door. So we can use the slingshot to activate that and head through. Here in this eastern room, we'll encounter our first Skulltula. If you whack his side, you can rotate him and stab his weak spot on his underbelly. If you're not precise with the controls, it can give you some trouble. Their visual design is pretty good though. Giant spiders are almost always a safe bet for heebie-jeebie stuff. There's a stone tablet here as well, with this hint about the gemstones opening doors, which we should already know because we had to do that to get in this room, but that's fine. We already found the one that it hints to above, but apparently there is one below somewhere. Thanks, tips. We'll also find at the bottom of this room a small crawl space where we can activate this switch, which raises the water level in this room and spills said water into the central room, raising it halfway there. We can climb these vines to get out of here and return to the central room. We'll find the gemstone below, as per the stone tablet's hint, underneath the western door here. The western room mirrors its eastern counterpart, but these sculptulas are blocking the path across the room. So we can use the slingshot to unravel these vines and then swing across to the other end of the room, where we can conveniently kill these sculptulas from behind if you want. We'll find another stone tablet, which hints that the gemstones are marked on the dungeon map with a red X. Okay. Then through the door, we'll find this chest with the actual dungeon map in it. Great. Something of note about Skyward Sword is that it does away entirely with the compass and effectively combines it with the map. So we'll have all of the treasure chests and points of interest marked on the map right away. Worth noting is the gemstone switch in the prior room, which raises the water level up all the way in the central room, allowing us to reach the balcony on the east end by jumping from this floating log and climbing the vine wall. We'll be on the previously inaccessible section of the eastern room from before, where we can kill this sculptula and then do a repeat of the eyeball puzzle from before, which is now expanded upon here with a second eyeball that we have to make dizzy simultaneously. We'll find our first small key in this chest, which will open the final door in the central room. Alright, that completes this whole first section of the dungeon, which I think is done pretty well. I really like this zigzagging across this room, and while this was the order I did things in here, because it feels like the most natural order that the dungeon progresses you through, you could technically actually raise the water level in the eastern and western room in either order, but this one just feels like the way that the game naturally funnels you. Heading through this door takes us into a second sort of central room, though this one is much larger in scale. There's once again an eastern, western, and northern door, which are all locked. There's plenty of baddies in this room as well, such as green bokoblins, sculptulas, and keys. In addition to those three doors, there's also a door leading into this interior room, which you can unlock by hitting this gem switch directly above the door. Heading inside takes us to the dungeon's mid-boss fight. This battle pits us against a Stalfos. He isn't too tough, but I do enjoy this battle. The Stalfos wields two swords, and he'll block two angles at a time with them, meaning you'll need to aim the direction of your sword swipes at whichever angle he leaves exposed. It's kind of funny reviewing this footage and comparing this to, say, some of the more dynamic looking battles from Wind Waker. It seems visually so much less interesting just swiping in different directions like this, as opposed to these seamless sort of parry mechanics of that game that move Link in big dramatic motions. But that's just watching the footage. Actually playing it is a different story. The game making you pay attention to the body language of your opponent and precisely plan and execute your own strikes accordingly is far more interesting to do yourself than to just watch. In some ways, the combat here is simple, but it's incredibly engaging. After enough strikes, he'll die and will be rewarded with the dungeon item. It's the beetle. The beetle is a fantastic item, which is actually this game's stand-in for the boomerang. In short, it's like a flying drone sort of item. As is pretty usual for when we get a new item, we'll be locked in the room and we'll have to use the item to get out. You can fly the beetle through this hole in the ceiling and strike the same gemstone as before in the previous room to unlock the door. And we'll be back in large central room number 2. This room is actually really great as it sort of allows you to just play around with the beetle for a bit to get used to it and explore these little nooks in the walls here, which are out of reach for Link, but hide some goodies you can grab with the beetle. We'll find various bits of cash, a fairy in this crate here, a switch to open this gate and get this piece of heart, and most importantly, this gem switch, which opens the door on the western end of the room. We can head through this and find this slightly flooded ruined hallway, and passing through the door at the end of the hall takes us into this room here. We can dispatch this sculptula and then tackle this puzzle here. This time it's 3 eyeballs that we have to make dizzy, which we can do by getting this block from the balcony up here and pushing it over here so we can stand on top of it. If we're positioned correctly, then all 3 eyes should be open at once, and then we can spin them around and open the treasure chest for another small key. We can head back through the hallway by activating this gem switch to raise the water level and swim up to the ledge, and passing through here and back into the large round room, we can spend the key we just got on the eastern door. Watch out for the Deku Babas on the ceiling, which you can actually cut off the ceiling with the beetle. We can head down the hall, kill this Staldra by cutting all 3 of its heads simultaneously, and head through the door, which will take us into this northernmost room with this huge chasm. You can kill this Boko, drop this Skulltula to its death, and we can open this gate back into the round central room from before. If you cross this tightrope over the chasm, you'll reach the boss door. However, we don't have the boss key yet. There's a bit of an obstacle course in this room here, which is really great, as we have to climb up and zigzag around this room swinging on all of these vines. It's honestly pretty fun. We'll find this chest with the boss key inside. Not the boss key, this gold carving inside. Yes, Skyward Sword does away with boss keys as well, replacing them with these 3D objects instead, which we have to rotate and maneuver to fit inside the locks of the boss doors. I don't mind this though, it adds one final small puzzle element onto a seemingly innocuous part of the game. Alright, we can head through the door to confront the dungeon boss. In this chamber, we'll find this creepy dude. This is Girahim, the Demon Lord. He came here for the same reason as you, to find Zelda, but with evil intentions instead. However, he becomes so frustrated with the fact that he can't pass through the next door to reach where Zelda is, that he decides he wants to take his frustrations out on you, initiating the battle. I love Girahim's writing here. He's got the perfect infusion of charming and sadistic. He's genuinely one of my favorite Zelda villains ever. Also worth noting is how great Girahim's theme music is. During his cutscenes, we get this slower, dramatic version of the theme with these bellowing organs. It's a great piece. Then during the battle, the theme is sped up to match the intensity of the combat. It's so dramatic and might genuinely be one of my favorite pieces of boss battle music in the entire series. It just captures Girahim's melodramatic but simultaneously dangerous personality so perfectly. Minor spoiler here, but this is only the first time that we'll battle Girahim, and in this encounter, he isn't too tough. He's only the first boss after all. They do at least make this fit with the story, however, as he's more or less just toying with Link at this point. Like a cat playing with its food. During the first phase of the battle, he'll just slowly approach you and try to catch your sword as you swing at him. His catches are telegraphed by the way he holds his hand out, forcing you to somewhat psych him out. Have him ready his hand in one direction, but then actually swing in the opposite way. This sounds simple enough, but if you're not used to these sword controls, then it can take some serious getting used to. Thankfully, he doesn't do much to actually attack you yet, letting you get plenty of practice in here. After dealing a fair amount of hits to him, he'll get fed up, draw his sword, and actually do battle with you. Ironically, I actually feel like this portion of the fight is easier. Even though he'll now actually attack you and deal damage, he doesn't block you as much either, meaning it's easier to land your own hits on him as well. When he rushes you, you can time your parry with your shield to stun him momentarily and land some hits, or you can strike him in this moment after he teleports near you. After enough hits, he'll withdraw from the battle, saying that he can sense that Zelda has left, and frankly, he cares more about finding her than killing you. So he leaves. We'll get our heart container as usual and find ourselves in the peaceful, serene Skyview Spring. We can activate the crest here, and Fi will give us something of another exposition dump before giving us this ruby tablet. So that's it for the dungeon. Overall, while I think Skyward Sword maybe takes a little too long to get going, once it does get going, it goes really well. The dungeons in this game are really top notch, and Skyview Temple is no exception. It's not too hard overall, which makes sense since it's the first dungeon, but it does well to lay the groundwork for how the game handles its dungeons overall, introducing us to some mechanics outside, and then greatly expanding upon and utilizing those ideas within the dungeon itself to make for some really cool puzzles. I particularly like how believable this place feels as an actual temple that has fallen into disrepair over the years, and the overall tense atmosphere accomplished with its aesthetic and music is really great. It's not my favorite dungeon in the game, mostly because the dungeons later on just get really freaking good, but it achieves a great balance between its starter level simplicity and engaging challenges, and it introduces us to Girahim, who is not just important to the story, but makes for a great introductory boss fight to get us confident with the game's combat mechanics. Overall, I think it's done really well. Using the ruby tablet that we obtained at the end of Skyview Temple, we can now create another opening in the cloud barrier and descend into the Elden region. Elden Volcano, which is almost certainly Death Mountain itself, houses our next destination. We'll land near the base of the volcano and have to make our way up to the summit. On our way, we'll meet these guys, the Mogmas, who will give out some tips if needed, as well as providing us with these very useful digging mitts, which allow us to dig. Specifically, when you find these patches of soft dirt, you can use the digging mitts to unearth some buried items, such as rupees and other materials. We'll also see our first glimpse of this mysterious Sheikah character along the way, who extends this bridge for us. Thanks! We also learn how to use bomb flowers, including the new rolling mechanic, which is honestly a lot of fun. After what is pretty much more obstacle coursing, we'll find this temple at the summit of the mountain, and we'll overhear these Mogmas talking about how they saw Zelda being taken hostage inside. However, the temple is locked shut, and the key was broken into 5 pieces, so we'll need to explore around the mountain to find those key shards. Dowsing is pretty useful here, I'll admit, but most of these key fragments are pretty close by to the summit. Anyways, once we've assembled them all, we can unlock this great door and enter the dungeon. Welcome to the Earth Temple. No, not that Earth Temple. Though they share the same name, the similarities between the Earth Temple in the Wind Waker and Skyward Sword and there. This temple is not a house for the undead, but rather a lava-filled cavernous structure with incredibly vibrant ornate architecture which celebrates many great spirits and beasts. Truthfully, I was looking forward to talking about this dungeon's architecture due to just how visually stunning and colorful it all is. It feels incredibly inspired, with its depictions of flames, some sort of creature with what appears to be a very literal depiction of a third eye, statues of elephants and lions, snakes which have their backs make up the many walkways of the dungeon, ending off in their faces, as well as the snake heads around the doorways, what look almost like moblin heads and faces, and most prominently, dragons. Dragon symbolism and iconography litter almost every room of this dungeon, and it's pretty fantastic looking. We see these dragon heads spewing lava, several huge dragon sculptures, and artwork depicting great serpentine dragons all over the walls. I can't get enough of the incredible visual design of this place, though these torches look weirdly out of place in my opinion, almost like they were pulled straight out of Wind Waker with these bold outlines and squared off swirling designs, but oh well, whatever. It's one weird out of place thing not a big deal. Overall though, this place is surprisingly gorgeous. In addition to all of that, it seems like the monsters that have taken up residence in here have done some construction of their own, with these crude structures here and there made from metal sheets and what looks like chain link fence, matching the crudeness of the enemy camps outside. It's easy to overlook, but I like how well these stand in contrast to the ancient temple itself. As was the case with Skyview, there does seem to be something of a disconnect between the dungeon's themes and its actual name. Skyview was a dark, claustrophobic underground ruin being reclaimed by nature, and the Earth Temple is at the summit of a mountain and is a grand structure with incredibly bright, colorful, and robust architecture. Shouldn't it be called the Fire Temple instead? Well, the answer probably lies in the two spirit springs at the end of the dungeons. Skyview's was actually open air with a literal view of the sky, while the Earth Spring at the end of this dungeon is tucked in the back of a cave deep within the earth. But furthermore, Zelda is on some great mission apparently, having to visit the Skyview and Earth Temples, playing further into that prophecy from the beginning of the game, as we follow her and venture to these springs of Earth and Sky. These thematic tie-ins to said prophecy also call to mind those two final temples from the Wind Waker, the Earth and Wind Temple, wind being the element closely associated with the sky, which we needed to visit in that game in order to power up the Master Sword. Now, here we are again, following behind Zelda, playing right into the words of this ancient verse. I swear I'm going somewhere with all this, and we'll get into more detail about why this is all important later on in the series, I promise. This dungeon isn't particularly large, all things considered. It's about the same size and length as the last temple, but I really feel like Skyward Sword gets very creative with its level design in this dungeon, and ups the ante with the challenge here. First off, it pretty much does away with spelling out its puzzles on stone tablets, instead replacing them with these magma NPCs. In practice, it's just about the same concept, but they feel so much less out of place since they're playing into the story and they don't really offer that much in the way of actual hints. The combat challenges here get a nice jump up in difficulty as well, introducing us to enemies like these Spooms, who are more of a nuisance than anything, as well as the Zalfos, a staple recurring enemy. They're much quicker than the Bokoblins we've already faced, and attack far more aggressively. I love fighting these dudes. Make sure as well to upgrade to a metal shield instead of that flammable wooden one. The music of the Earth Temple is totally my jam. The energetic strumming, the upbeat percussion, and that main tune which has this perfect infusion of mystery, danger, and fun. It perfectly encapsulates this dungeon's design. There's dangerous enemies around every corner. If you misstep, you'll face a fiery death in these pools of lava, and yet you'll spend this dungeon hopping around and rolling about on this giant sphere, doing this goofy balancing act. I love how well the dungeon walks the line between being serious and just having fun, and just how creative it all is. And this theme song plays into that balance perfectly. Let's get into the actual progression. There's this long hallway at the start of the dungeon where we can get used to hopping around platform to platform, introducing us to the way that these platforms can raise and lower with these lava geysers. In this side alcove, we'll find one of the Mogmas here, who says that his buddy has gone missing, and reiterates that he also saw Zelda get kidnapped and dragged through here. We can continue hopping our way over to the end of the room, where we'll hit a supposed dead end, as the bridge that we need to cross is retracted. There's these ropes connected to gears on the ground on either end of this platform, and cutting each rope lowers the bridge down part of the way, but not completely. The last rope we need to cut is out of reach, so we can use the beetle to fly over and snip it, lowering the bridge completely. This is actually a moment in which the HD version's increased resolution is to the game's benefit. I know graphics aren't everything when talking game design, but in this case, it's just literally easier to see this final rope with the increased resolution, aiding in that player conveyance. Okay, crossing over the bridge takes us into the dungeon's central room. We're limited to just this platform when we enter, and right away we'll be confronted by our first Lizalfos. He has this stone shield on one arm, and he'll dodge your attacks and block one angle of his body with the shield. So you'll want to execute your own attacks by swiping in the direction that he leaves exposed. Just watch out because he will come at you and whip you with his tail if you're not quick enough. Examining our surroundings, we'll see the walkway over to the central platform of the room is destroyed. However, there's the remains of a head from one of the giant stone statues here, and it's covered in bomb flowers. So you can use either the beetle or slingshot to combust the bombs, causing the statue to break apart, leaving only a giant eye. We can balance on the stone sphere and traverse the lava this way. Just make sure to let Link recenter himself on the sphere now and then so that you don't fall off. You can roll over these spoons to crush them, which is just hilariously satisfying, and we can look around the room. The first stop that the game sort of funnels you towards is this section of the hallway on the eastern end of the room. I really like that they've intentionally placed this enemy for you to chase after in order to get you to go this way. We'll find here that missing Mogma. He'll tell you that he lost his bomb bag in the next room and request your help retrieving it. However, the door into that room is blocked by rocks. You can destroy them by ducking into this fenced off area and rolling a bomb under the fence to the rocks. Through the door, we'll be at the dungeon's mid-boss fight. Wait, mid-boss already? Yep, this time it's a face-off against a pair of Lizalfos. We already battled one in the previous room, so the tactics are the same here, but you know, there's two of them. I'm gonna say now the duo of Lizalfos, the hexagon-shaped platforms, the lava-themed dungeon. It all feels to me like a neat callback to that mid-boss fight from Dodongo's Cavern in Ocarina of Time. Nice. Between the two of them, they're pretty relentless, so if you're having trouble taking them on, you'll want to try to separate them and take them on one at a time. Individually, they're far less of a threat. Otherwise, once they're both defeated, a chest will appear with the dungeon item. Oh, it's that Mogma's bomb bag. But it's also the dungeon item, as when we take it back to him, he'll be so grateful that he just lets us keep it. He gives us 5 bombs to start off with as well. The bomb bag is actually pretty neat in this game, as we don't always have to rely on drops to replenish our stock of bombs. This game lets us, for the first time in the series, pluck bomb flowers, then extinguish them and store them in our bomb bag for later. I love that. Okay, we can continue rolling around and exploring the central room. We'll find a destructible wall in this corner of the room, which hides some treasure. And if we make our way to the central platform, we'll see that the main path is inaccessible since the walkway up to it is retracted down, leaving the door on a ledge out of reach. We can bomb this rock on a ledge and head through the door on the western end of the room, where we'll hop over the lava here, fight some bokoblins, and find this chest which contains the dungeon map. Back in the central room, we can explore around some more, and we'll find that there's these 2 push buttons that we can press in with the stone sphere to raise the walkway. However, only one of them is accessible from here, being on the western end of the walkway. The path to the other button is too narrow for us to get to on the sphere. Thankfully, the dungeon just gave us the map, and that's a big hint. By examining it, we can see that there is a hidden path extending out of the eastern wall of the room. And if we roll over there, sure enough, we'll see that the wall is cracked here, a classic Zelda trope, as well as the wall being marked by an X on the map. You can use bombs to destroy the wall, and we'll find this lava-filled corridor that we can roll on through. As we proceed down this hall, we'll come to what appears to be another dead end in the form of this platform blocking the path. But just like before, by checking the map, we'll see another hidden passage and sure enough, a cracked wall that we can bomb and make our way around the dead end. Ooh, a silver rupee. We'll hit another supposed dead end as a gate blocks the path, and just like the one at the start of the dungeon, we can use the beetle to cut the 2 ropes, one on the front side and one on the back, which is accessible through this tunnel. Cutting both opens the gate, so we can roll on through over this precarious narrow section, and we'll come back into the main central room where we can push that switch in to finish raising the walkway. Wonderful. We can head through the now accessible door and we'll be in this room with this long ramp. As we step onto the slope, boulders will drop. You can duck between the gap in the first wave of boulders and rest in this alcove while your stamina refills. You also will need to use said alcove to avoid the second wave of boulders, which don't have any space in between them. Around the corner, we'll find a second ramp, but this time the alcove we'd need to use to avoid the boulders is blocked off by rocks, so you can't head straight up. There's a small hole you'll find at the base of the slope, and by heading through, we can take these stairs up to this balcony overlooking the ramp. You'll want to toss a bomb down onto the ramp so that it rolls down and destroys those rocks. There's this convenient visual indicator of where to aim your throw for. Note the damage to the floor tiles. Now we can try again heading up this second ramp using the alcove that we just unblocked to avoid the boulders just like before. At the top of the ramp, we'll see the boss door. However, it's beneath this huge dragon head statue, which is spewing lava out of the mouth, effectively blocking access to the boss door. We don't have the boss key anyways, so we'll have to press on. There's a small staircase leading onto this ramp, which is actually the body of this other enormous dragon statue. There's a great little set piece here. At the top, we'll find the dragon sculpture, which, like the golden carving from before, is the stand-in for the boss key. Then as we head back, the mouth of the statue will open, dropping this boulder onto the ramp. There's this very Indiana Jones chase sequence as we have to sprint down the ramp and duck out of the way of the boulder. It's brief, but very intense. I like that. After successfully avoiding the boulder, it'll fly off the ramp and into the first dragon statue's mouth, blocking the lava flow. Now we can access the boss door, and as we do, the dragon statue actually swallows that boulder. We can rotate the dragon sculpture to fit the lock and head into the boss room. The boss room is massive, ornate, and empty. It's one of those it's quiet, too quiet moments. We can head up the stairs and we'll find more huge dragon statues, and we'll see that boulder from before trailing through the ribs at the top of the room. Fi will point out that Zelda was definitely held captive here. We can see the chains that were used to restrain her on the floor, but she must have escaped. There's a bunch of bombs and hearts here, so make sure to stock up if you need to, but otherwise we can hop off this ledge and make our way up this huge ramp in the middle of the room. But then we'll see at the top of the room our old pal Girahim. He once again laments at not having captured Zelda, stating how his minions had her before that mysterious figure, that's the Sheikah that we saw before, had let her free. He decides the best way to relieve his stress is to set a monster loose on us and watch us die. Thanks, buddy. Then the mouth of this dragon statue opens and the boulder drops onto the ramp, revealing itself to be the dungeon boss. What a great build up to this boss fight. We get chased by the boulder, we see the boulder rolling around the room, and then it drops and reveals itself. This is Scaldera, the pyroclastic fiend. Scaldera seems to be made of molten magma with a stone carapace, and one big ol' eyeball. You can probably guess his weak point, right? Visually, I guess I'm fine with his design, but it's certainly far from the best this game has to offer. It's not all that inspired in my opinion, but it's a serviceable boss battle, all things considered. My biggest issue with this fight is how uninvolved it can all be, which is a shame because there's some great potential here that wasn't tapped into. The arena is this narrow ramp, meaning you're limited with just how much space you have to operate, which would have been cool if there weren't this massive safe zone at the top, which has an endless supply of bombs and a lot of recovery hearts. A lot. As Scaldera rushes towards you at the top of the ramp, you can use bombs to stun him, which causes him to roll to the bottom. Once he's at the bottom, he'll start inhaling to charge up a fire breath attack, but you can use this opportunity to toss a bomb right into his mouth. The explosion will destroy some of his stone shell, leaving his eyeball partially exposed and vulnerable to attack. Strike his eyeball, then repeat the process. The more of his shell you destroy, the less he can hide his eye from you, and the more vulnerable he is. Wow, a Zelda boss where you throw bombs in his mouth and attack his giant eyeball. How original. Man, this could have been a really cool boss fight. There's a lot of potential here with this narrow arena. Think like Super Metroid's Crocomire battle, which is a reverse tug-of-war, making you control your space and force your opponent off the ledge. Something more unique like that could have lent itself to separating this battle from the long list of samey, tropey Zelda bosses. But no. Heck, you barely have to be engaged in this battle, and this narrow arena hardly matters. Scaldera will literally just walk over you and end up rolling back down to the ramp by hitting one of the bomb flowers on the top, meaning you don't really have to control the space here. You can just stand around at the bottom and wait for him. When he rolls down, he's easy enough to avoid too. This could have been a tense battle, but instead, he's just doing his routine here, and we're just there for it, waiting for him to open his mouth so we can toss a bomb in, then poking him in the eye. Oh well, I guess not every battle is going to be as engaging and intense as the one-on-one duels with Girahim. After enough hits to his eyeball, he'll go down, and we'll get our heart container as usual. We can head through the door and into the Spirit Spring, We'll find Zelda here with that mysterious Sheikah figure from before. However, this happy reunion is cut short, as they remind Zelda that they have to focus on the task at hand. Zelda apologizes and is ushered through the portal, and this Sheikah character takes a moment to chastise us for taking too long to get here before heading through herself, leaving us here alone. We'll activate the goddess crest here just like before, and we'll receive the amber tablet. And that's the dungeon. The Earth Temple is above all else an absolutely fun time set over the backdrop of an incredibly detailed architectural wonder that pays homage to a lot of different folklore. I love the visual design of this place to bits, and I think this ball rolling mechanic is done in just the right dose to be unique and fun, while also not overstaying its welcome. If they had taken it much further, it could have gotten really stale, but they dole it out in just the right dose. While Scaldera is a rather underwhelming boss battle in my opinion, the rest of the level design and combat more than make up for this. My only complaint beyond the boss fight would perhaps be that the dungeon is a little too heavy-handed and generous with the recovery hearts. They are everywhere, between the swaths of heart flowers, the hearts you can dig up with the mitts, and the fairies hidden in the dungeon. It just feels like it's a bit over the top. Maybe they were worried about players taking too much damage from all of the lava, but as long as you're mindful of where you step and make sure to stop to recenter yourself on this sphere periodically, then this shouldn't really be an issue. But I guess you could still argue that we're in the early stages of the game, and having a lot of hearts isn't too intrusive on the overall level design. There's still plenty of other secrets to find, so the entire dungeon is really fun to explore. I think it's the perfect step up the difficulty curve after Skyview Temple, and I just genuinely had a lot of fun playing through this section of the game. Last time, we conquered the Earth Temple and received the Amber Tablet, which will create the last opening through the Cloud Barrier, allowing us to descend into the Lanayru Desert. We'll land here at the Lanayru Mines, where we'll have some things to do before we can make it to the next dungeon. Most notably, we'll be introduced to the Time Shift Stones, which are one of the game's coolest mechanics. When struck, the time shift stones create an area of effect, and the space within that bubble is transformed back to the state it was in the distant past. It's a really strange, localized form of time travel. This, for one thing, gives a wonderful visual flair to this area, contrasting the barren, lifeless desert with its former state as a lush, green environment. Ancient ruins show their old colors as lively and ornate buildings, and most interestingly, old machines, mechanisms, and this race of ancient robots spring back to life. Yes, indeed, as it turns out, the Lanayru region was once home to the ancient robots who, along with many of their machines and equipment, harnessed these time shift stones as a power source. There's some really cool puzzle solving involving these time shift stones, wherein we may have to switch back and forth between these two eras just to make it down a single hallway. As automated minecarts become functioning, sink sand becomes solid floor, barriers vanish, and doors become openable. It's incredibly clever design. Eventually, we'll make it to this section of the desert where we'll find these ancient ruins. One of these ancient robots, which we rescue here, upgrades our beetle to allow it to pick up and drop items, which is most useful for grabbing bomb flowers and dropping them onto enemies or hard to reach rocks. Soon after, we'll also have our map altered to reflect the ancient state of this area, showing where hidden paths are. That's pretty neat. At the back end of the desert, we'll find this temple, known as the Temple of Time. No, not that Temple of Time. However, the entrance is blocked off. We'll learn that there's an alternative entrance through the ancient Lanayru mining facility. However, the entrance to that place is also blocked off. We'll uncover said entrance by finding this rotating mechanism, activating 3 corresponding mechanisms spread throughout the desert, then activating the main one, rotating its dials so that it reflects the directions of the other 3 as indicated on your map. It's a pretty cool puzzle. Once done, this ancient structure will rise from beneath the sand, revealing the entrance to the dungeon. This is the Lanayru mining facility. Presumably this was once where the ancient robots would take the timeshift stones to be refined. However, it's been lost to time, filled with sand, and overrun by pests like these Araka creatures which just jump on you. Get off of me, you creepy crawly creature. This place also features the timeshift stones that we saw outside, meaning we can alternate many of the rooms between their current run-down state and back to their glory days when the facility was operational, as minecarts, conveyor belts, and whirring machines run autonomously, transporting raw ore and timeshift stones between its many rooms. I have to commend Skyward Sword for how it takes what could have easily been a lifeless and bland area, being the vast barren desert, and using that as a way to juxtapose itself with its former glory days via these timeshift stones. The striking visual difference between these two time periods is really pleasant to see. It's a visual treat. The present day has this melancholic, deteriorated feeling, while the ancient past is vibrant, colorful, and bustling with energy, literally in some cases. The difference between these time periods' enemy types aids in this contrast. All of the enemies in the present day are creatures who have moved into the abandoned facility, like Keese, the creepy Arakas, the Spooms, and the blowfish-like Froaks. Meanwhile, in the ancient past, we have aggressive mechanisms such as these Beamos, Centrobes, and this variant of the classic Armos statue. All of these mechanisms seem to be powered by this ancient blue energy via the timeshift stones, and serve to protect this refinery from intruders. Just like outside in the desert, the timeshift stones play a vital role in the puzzles and obstacles of this dungeon. You'll find yourself unable to overcome certain obstacles if you're in the wrong time period, and the dungeon adds a twist to this by having smaller areas of effect with some of these stones, and placing some of them in moving minecarts, which cause platforms and enemies to appear and vanish as the stone moves throughout the room. I love this stuff. The architecture here is pretty neat. The industrial factory feeling of this place is done very well, without it being just bland metal sheets littered with nuts and bolts. Despite being a refinery, the mining facility is incredibly detailed and ornate, with depictions of the ancient robots who ran this place being carved into the doors and walls, as well as some statues of them found here and there. There's these colorful patterns and symbols lining every floor and wall, and even paintings on the ceiling depicting clouds and stars. Interestingly, barred doors, which usually feature simple iron bars blocking them in other dungeons, depict instead what appears to be the outlines of sand in an hourglass. Considering the dungeon's time travel mechanics, as well as it being found in the center of the desert, literal sandy place, I simply can't think of a more suitable symbolism to represent this place. Thanks goes out to my pal Lorulian Historian for pointing this detail out to me. The music here is designed to reflect the time travel aspect of the dungeon, as different layers and instruments fade in or out to represent the time period that you're currently in, with this echoey, hollow sounding version representing the deteriorated present day state of the facility. Meanwhile, this robust and energetic version of the song plays in the past when the facility was operating and colorful. In theory, this is great. I really love this idea, but it's held back by the fact that I find the song itself to be incredibly irritating. Something about this repetitive high note on what sounds like maybe a xylophone just annoys me so much. It's the only dungeon music in the series that I can think of that I actively dislike. In fact, I would say that I feel nearly everything about this dungeon is really great, except for that song, which drives me bananas. I'll admit that the past version of the song is far more bearable with that robust instrumentation, but even then that repetitive high note still hammers on. It's really too bad, because it holds back what could otherwise be a nearly flawless dungeon experience. Okay, Progression time. The dungeon will begin us in this foyer room. There's a single door which is locked, and on either end of the door are these levers which we can pull down. This one on the right is accessible by dashing across the sink sand, which opens this alcove with an optional treasure chest. The other lever can be reached by using the beetle to drop a bomb flower into this statue to knock it over, then dashing across the sand here as well. I like how this puzzle is telegraphed to you already. We've had some practice with this idea of knocking the statues down outside, but even still the dungeon makes sure to place some of these statues already knocked over on either side of the room to reinforce this idea. And the game has done well to hide goodies behind many of these statues to incentivize us to actually investigate behind them. It's good stuff. Okay, into the next room. There's a pair of Staldras to kill. Remember to cut all 3 heads in a single strike, and there's 3 doors from here. One to the east, which requires a key, one to the west, which is barred shut, and one to the north on a ledge. That's the only one that's unlocked, so we'll go there first. We can reach the ledge by pushing this block and climbing up. This takes us to the dungeon's massive central room. However, at this time, only a small section of the room is actually accessible, as this section to the north and the west are both gated off. We can access this balcony on the east end of the room by first using the beetle to grab a bomb and dropping it on these crates to destroy them. Climbing up to the balcony, we'll find a chest with our first small key. Great. The ladder to go further up is blocked at the top, so there's nowhere else in this room we can go just yet. Instead, we can backtrack to the previous room and spend that key we just found on the eastern door. This will take us into what I'll call the first factory room. There's several conveyor belts in this room which are currently inactive. We can cross here, climb this ladder, then destroy the crates blocking the next ladder with the same method as before, and at the top of this ledge we'll find this push switch which opens access to the timeshift stone in the center of the room. It's a bit tricky to hit if you're using your slingshot, so I recommend just using the beetle to activate it. This brings the factory room to life, activating the conveyor belts and the machines in here. I just love the visual presentation of rooms like this one. There's several Beamos which can be defeated by attacking the glowing blue weak points, specifically cutting them down to size by slashing across these midsections and then stabbing the eye. If they do fire a laser at you, then you can shield parry to reflect it back and momentarily stun them. We'll want to make our way over to this end of the room by crossing these conveyor belts. We'll pass by this locked door, remember that, and by making our way up here, we'll find this lever which opens the door. There's another lever on the lower edge here as well, which opens the bars blocking this alcove for an optional chest with cash. Heading into the room we just opened takes us into this room with these blocks. We can hop around the top of these blocks to make our way around the rooms, and if we knock these frokes back into the piles of rocks, they'll actually blow up. Watch where you're jumping, because in the lower sections of this room are several spots with spike traps in the floor. Once we make our way to the opposite end of the room, we'll find this platform with a ladder, which brings us to this chest with the dungeon item. Already. This is the Gust Bellows. The Gust Bellows, which is the opposite of Minish Cap's Gust Jar, is like a portable high-powered fan. It blows wind. That's the whole thing. The item itself isn't that interesting, but how it's used, that's where things get fun. In this room, we can use it to blow these frokes back from a safer distance. The dungeon actually places these 2 piles of sand right here beside the chest to give you a hint to try the item out as well. And there are actually these sand piles all over the place, which usually hides at least a rupee or some other goodie, though occasionally a baddie. It's a nice way to incentivize you to actually explore and use this item thoroughly. Okay, we can continue over to the other end of the room, and in order to access the door, we'll need to use the Gust Bellows to clear the sand out of the way. Then we can head on through. And this actually loops us back to the central room once again, at the top of that inaccessible ledge near where we found the small key before. We're dropped back into the same spot as before, nowhere else we can go here in the main room. So we can head back into that crossroad room from before, which still had that one door left to go through. We can clear these sand piles in the corner here to find a push block and a switch, so we can use those to open that western door that was barred shut. Heading through takes us into factory room number 2. We can dash to these platforms in the sink sand, and we'll find this sand pile in the corner, which actually hides a timeshift stone. We can revert the room back to its past state and use the Gust Bellows to turn the rotors and move these platforms along the rails. We'll also use use the gust bellows to spin this pinwheel above the door to open it. There's a BMOS here, as well as our first encounter with a Centrobe. They'll launch missiles at you, which can be reflected back with a carefully timed shield parry, or by using your sword Dead Man's Volley style. When it launches these mini orbs at you, they can also be destroyed by swiping your sword along the blue lines. This enemy is pretty cool. I just wish that when they died, they didn't consistently drop piles of cash into bottomless pits. At least come over to the ledge, please. Okay, we can cross this gap, grab this optional chest if you want, then climb up the ladder here, dispatch this BMOS, and open this door by spinning the pinwheel beside it. The next room has a pair of Staldra to battle. Assuming you're not encountering a game-breaking glitch, you can push this block over to reach the ledge. Behind these bars is a chest, and you'll also see some piles of sand. You can use the gust bellows, and you'll uncover another timeshift stone, just tucked out of reach. You can use either a Skyward Strike or your slingshot to activate it, transforming the room. Now we'll have our first encounter with this game's version of an Armos. You can spin the rotor on its head, just like those platforms we saw before, and strike the 2 gems in its mouths? This unlocks both the next door as well as the bars blocking that treasure chest, so we can duck back over and open it to get ourselves the dungeon map. It's kind of strange in my opinion how early this dungeon gives you the item and how late it waits to give you the map, since there's now only a handful of unexplored rooms. But oh well, that's really no big deal. This next door takes us back into the main central room in that barred off southwestern section. You can actually open this gate from here to make backtracking easier, but otherwise what we'll want to do is use the map to navigate the submerged pathways under the sink sand here, which is one of those concepts that was introduced to us outside of the dungeon. We'll find a crawl space here with a mini labyrinth leading to this optional chest with some loot, as well as one here which leads us into the next room. The floor of this room is almost entirely covered in sand, which we'll want to disperse some of since there's hidden spike traps all over the place. As we make our way around, we'll uncover the safe path through this room, as well as a switch to unlock the door, and another optional chest, all hidden beneath the sand. I will admit that clearing out sand in here is weirdly satisfying to do, not unlike some of the vacuuming in Luigi's Mansion 3. Alright, through the next door, we'll find ourselves in the northwest corner of the central room now. There's a sand pile here, which hides a minecart with a timeshift stone. Striking the stone will activate the minecart, and as it travels along, the timeshift area of effect will cause platforms to appear across these gaps, so we will have to follow along to progress through the room. We'll come to this platform near the center of the room, where we'll battle a Centrobe, and the cart's path will be blocked by this gate. We can open this one with the gust bellows as well, and follow the cart through. Stay close to the cart to cross this section as well. There's a couple BMOS, but only one is actually mandatory to defeat. There's not really enough time to defeat the rest, so I just recommend stunning them by reflecting their laser back at them, then moving on. At the end of the tracks, we can open this gate, which is right near the first entrance into this room on the southern end. Cross the bridge to the east, and we'll find a second minecart. We can activate this stone and follow along the path here as well. There's a barred door here along the path, but the cart won't stop here. In order to open the door, you'll need to wait as the minecart passes this pinwheel on the wall and use the gust bellows to spin it before the range of the timeshift stone runs out. Also, as a side note, if during these sections you fall off or even just make it to the end of the cart's path and get impatient, there are these levers placed here so that you can always call the cart back to your position. It's a small detail, but it feels like a nice courtesy. That door we unlocked takes us into the third and final factory room. Watch out for the Araka, and we'll cross the inactive conveyor belt, then climb these vines. We can use bombs to knock over these statues to form a makeshift sort of bridge, and in this corner of the room we'll find a timeshift stone under this pile of sand. So let's activate it. Now we can head back across here, dispatch this BMOS, cross the now active conveyor belts, then use this platform to cross the ledge on the other end of the room. We'll fight another Centrobe here, and we'll find more of these statues on this end of the room. One is already knocked over as a hint, so we can knock the other two over using bombs, and we'll see that behind each of them are these symbols of robot faces. Keep that in mind. On the other side of the room, there's 3 more statues to knock over, so we'll use this rotor platform to cross over here, move this block to open this ladder for later, then ride the other rotor platform to put ourselves into position to knock over the other 3 statues, which each hide a gem switch. So there's a simple enough puzzle here. There's the 3 gem switches, and those 3 sets of robot faces with the corresponding order to strike the switches. 2, 3, then 1. Oh, right, 23 is number 1. Thanks for reminding me, buddy. So strike them in that order, and that will unlock the gate at the northern end of the room. We can duck down this path and climb up that ladder we unblocked, battle these 2 Armos, and we'll find this chest with the boss key in the form of this ancient circuit. This door will arbitrarily unlock for some reason, so we can head over there and we'll emerge in the northeastern end of the central room. There's one more optional chest we can find on this ledge here, but otherwise we can activate this final timeshift stone in the minecart, ride the rotor platform across the gap here, and bring the cart over so that the boss door is within the timeshift area of effect. We can do this rotating puzzle with the ancient circuit to unlock the door and head into the boss room. The boss room is flooded with sand, appearing empty at first, but it won't be long before the boss emerges from below. This giant scorpion creature, the 1000-year arachnid, Moldarak. Okay, so Moldarak is the adult form of those tiny little Araka creatures we've been killing the entire way through the dungeon. And I guess it's pretty pissed off that we killed all of its babies. Understandable, actually. The visual design of Moldarak is pretty straightforward. It's a giant scorpion. Moldarak has a single eyeball on its face and another eyeball in each claw. Despite the admittedly cliché boss design, I really like how dangerous this guy looks. If it grabs you with one of its claws, you'll be trapped in its grip and it'll drain those hearts rapidly. In order to defeat it, you'll want to wait until it opens its claws, then strike those eyes. Makes sense? You'll get a bit of a visual indicator as well when it's about to strike you, as its eye will flash red. After enough hits to each claw, you'll actually remove them, leaving only its single eye on its face, which you can stab, you know. You can stab him in the eye. Just poke him right there. There, just give him a little poke. Moldarak may retreat beneath the sand, but if it does, you can use the gust bellows to blow the sand around and reveal it, causing it to rise back up from the ground and engage with you again. It won't take too many more eyeball stabs from here, and Moldarak will go down. Not too difficult a boss fight, all things considered. It's certainly far from the best the game has to offer. I genuinely think that if they had upped the difficulty here, that this could have been a far greater battle, but unfortunately we don't get that. So this one goes down with Scaldera as being a sort of underwhelming boss battle. Actually, I would still put it above Scaldera, however, because at least you have to stay engaged in the battle, instead of, just standing around waiting your turn. So despite its lack of difficulty, at least it's still a fun battle. With the boss defeated, the sand will drain from the room, and we'll get our heart container. Before we move on, I just want to say that this boss room is super cool if you just linger here for a moment to look around. There's this cool stained glass skylight, and the bottom of the room appears to be a switching station for some sort of rail system. It's very detailed, but most players will probably just grab the heart container and go. So I thought I'd mention it. It's just too bad we never get to see this room in its past state. Ah well. Heading through the door, we'll find ourselves in this enormous hallway. In order to cross the gap here, you can use the beetle to activate the timeshift stone at the center of the room so that we can ride this minecart along the rail here. This room is just all spectacle. The game just really wants you to look around and appreciate how gorgeous it is, and I love it. It's simply beautiful. Heading up these stairs takes us into this cutscene. We'll be inside the Temple of Time, finally, and we'll see Zelda here with that Sheikah figure from before. But suddenly, our pal Girahim bursts in to ruin the happy reunion. He places a barrier in our path and goes right for Zelda. This character, now revealed to be Impa, blocks Girahim's path. Zelda takes the moment to throw us her harp, but there's no time to admire it. Girahim breaks Impa's shield, but the barrier wears down and we leap in. Impa and Zelda escape through this portal, which is actually the Gate of Time, and Girahim is pretty peeved. He promises us pain whenever we next shall meet before teleporting away, leaving us all alone once more. So that's the dungeon. Oh man, the Lanayru mining facility is such a fun dungeon to complete. I love the way it weaves in and out of this massive central room, constantly allowing us to create shortcuts, and I adore the time shift stone mechanics here. It's such a brilliant twist on the dungeon formula, and such an interesting twist on the time travel concept, giving us these smaller areas of effect. And most of all, I just love the aesthetic of this place when it's in its past state, and how good looking it is made even more apparent when the game contrasts it with its run-down present-day state. While there are some underwhelming ideas here that hold the dungeon back from being the very best the game has to offer, namely the boss battle, the annoying dungeon music, and the gust bellows being somewhat meh as an item, even those points could be argued. Music is incredibly subjective, so even though I don't care for it, maybe someone else might find it catchy. The gust bellows may not be the best item, but the way it's used is really good. It's genuinely used for some creative and satisfying puzzles, and even though Moldarak isn't the coolest boss battle, it still manages to be pretty engaging and genuinely has a creepy design. Overall, the good stuff here far outweighs the bad. The dungeon is incredibly creative, has just the right amount of style and spectacle, and above all else is just genuinely really cool. Of all the dungeons in Skyward Sword, this is the one I was most looking forward to dissecting. But before we can get to all of that good stuff, the game's pacing sort of grinds to a screeching halt to make us run errands. There's a lot to do before we can make it to the dungeon, and it's a mixed bag between mind-numbing fetch questing and fun challenges. So let's recap this as quickly as we can. Per Impa's instructions, we need to return to the sealed grounds to talk to the old lady. On our way there, Groose gets the drop on us, leading to this hilarious cutscene in which he has a bit of a meltdown while coming to grips with everything that's going on. We can go inside, talk to the old lady, watch Groose have a tantrum, and learn to play the harp, which Zelda gave us at the end of the last dungeon. This actually summons a second gate of time, just like the one in Lanayru, but it's inactive. The old one says that we need to find 3 sacred flames to temper our sword before we can activate it. Just then, we get interrupted with an impromptu boss battle. Yep, our first encounter with the Imprisoned. It'll walk up this spiral path here, up towards the temple. Thankfully, he's not too difficult to defeat. You can slice his toes off to knock him down, then drive the ceiling spike back into his head, or you can skip the toes and just jump down directly onto his head and knock the spike back in that way. Once you've jabbed it back into his skull 3 times, he'll be resealed, which concludes the battle. Okay, so we have to find these 3 sacred flames, but first the old one tells us we have to find someone who knows information about finding those flames back on Skyloft. So we have to fly up, talk to Zelda's dad, who gives us a hint to turn these 2 windmills towards the plaza tower, but oh, one of them is broken and the propeller has fallen beneath the clouds. So we have to talk to this guy, get his robot fixed, find the propeller, use the robot to bring it back up, turn the windmills, play the harp up here, fly into the now open Thunderhead to find this floating island, solve the rotating bridge puzzle, activate this crest, listen to some exposition from Fi, learn this new song, fly back to Faron Woods, and play the song we just learned here to unlock the Silent Realm trial. Yeah, we're still not at the dungeon yet. We can complete the Silent Realm, which involves collecting these little light tier things, all while unarmed and avoiding being murdered. And when done, we'll be rewarded with the Water Dragon Scale, which gives us a new swimming ability. We'll get a hint from the Kikwi Elder to try exploring areas that we couldn't before, so we can enter the interior of this giant tree by swimming under here. We'll weave in and out, climbing to the top of the tree, and we'll find Yerbal, the Kikwi Hermit, up here at the top, who gives us a hint about opening the gate by Lake Floria by drawing a symbol to match this symbol here, which is the same symbol as the goddess Faror. So we do that, and then we dive into the lake, and we're still not there. Swim along the Floria River, following this Parella dude, fight some evil fish, and eventually we'll find Faron the Water Dragon. But apparently she is injured, so we have another fetch quest, which involves trekking all the way back to Skyview Temple, doing the dungeon again for some reason, though thankfully most of the doors remain unlocked from our previous visit here, but not this first one for some reason. And also getting interrupted by these mogmas constantly is both unnecessary and irritating. Guys, I know how to do this dungeon, I've been here before. We can head to the very back of the dungeon, battle a trio of Stalfos, all to get Pharaon a bottle of water. We can finally bring it back to her, which heals her, and she'll open for us the entrance to the dungeon. Finally. Before we actually enter the dungeon, I have a few thoughts I'd like to voice here. This section just takes too long. Even in the HD version, which is a lot more streamlined, this is still a long slog of fetch questing that is just kind of uninteresting. I actually do really enjoy the Silent Realm trial for how different it is from the rest of the game, as well as the imprisoned boss battle, but the other stuff is pretty egregious, especially going through Skyview Temple again. It's not like in Wind Waker, where we had to revisit the Forsaken Fortress only to be able to complete the parts of the dungeon that we couldn't before. No, we did complete the entire dungeon the first time through here, so this is just padding. If they cut out this section revisiting Skyview Temple, I genuinely believe it would be to the game's benefit. We already had to do so much just to get here, and to be just sent back to the other end of the forest to slog through a dungeon we've already completed is just irritating. The good news is that this all leads up to my personal favorite dungeon in the game. Even the dungeon entrance outside is gorgeous, with these pillars and the giant fish sculpture behind the waterfall, though that entrance does remind me a bit of Angler's Tunnel from Link's Awakening, but it's still incredibly memorable and visually striking. Final note, you don't really have to, but you can upgrade to the Sacred Shield at this point in the game. You'll get by just fine in this dungeon without it, but it is pretty cool looking and it does have some moderate usefulness. With all that stuff out of the way, let's head into the dungeon. The Ancient Cistern is one of the most beautifully inspired dungeons in the series. Its themes and architecture are some of the very best, and it's my personal favorite dungeon in Skyward Sword. But before we can discuss the dungeon's architecture and themes, we have to be familiar with the story behind its inspiration. And first off, what the heck is a cistern? I had never heard the word until this game, but it means a water reservoir, so this fits the bill for sure. But there's more to it than just the name. The dungeon is modeled after the famous Japanese story, The Spider's Thread. To summarize, the story tells of Buddha gazing through a lotus pond in paradise down into hell below. Among those suffering in hell, he sees a fellow named Kandata being boiled in the lake of blood. Kandata was an evil man, but had done one good deed in his life, by sparing the life of a spider. So, to offer Kandata a chance, Buddha lowers a spider's thread into hell so that Kandata may climb out. However, as he's climbing, Kandata notices many other people trying to climb out after him. Being worried that the extra weight may cause the thread to snap, he yells at them to get off the thread, stating it's meant only for him. His selfishness causes the thread to break, plunging him back down to hell. And, wow, what a story that is. To say that the dungeon is inspired by this story is an understatement. The main central room of the dungeon features this enormous Buddha statue sitting in this pool of water surrounded by lotus flowers. In fact, the symbol of the lotus flower is found all over the walls of this place as well, including the sculpture used to unlock the boss door. The upper part of the dungeon is seemingly a paradise. Golden light shines in from the skylights, and the architecture is bright and colorful. However, below the water in the dungeon's basement is a dark cave filled with what I believe to be pools of malice. Undead bokoblins wander aimlessly, sculptures of demons reside, and piles of bones fill rooms. The atmosphere in the dungeon's basement is a complete 180 from the paradise above. Just like in the story, this pool of water sits in the middle, separating heaven and hell, or at least the dungeon's representations of them. To really drive this inspiration home, a great deal of the enemies are skulltulas and walltulas, which are literally spiders, and then there is this segment in which you literally have to climb up a spider's thread out of the hellish basement and back into the bright first floor as undead bokoblins follow along after you. It's a short but tense section that is visually really awesome and genuinely gets the adrenaline going. It's great. Oh man, this dungeon just does so many things and it does them so well. It's hard to put a single theme to it. It's a water dungeon with lots of swimming, these waterways, pipes, all stuff we've seen in prior water temples. But it's more than that. It's a light-themed dungeon, and it's a shadow-themed dungeon. It explores duality, spirituality, the balance of light and dark, and it's not just the dungeon's 2 floors that fit this light-dark theme. Heck, even the lily pads here fit the bill. The tops of them are safe spots to rest and stand on, while the bottoms have these barbed roots, which will hurt you. The lotus flower, which grows all over the place and is painted on the walls, also fits with this theme. In Buddhism, the lotus flower is said to represent self-realization, spiritual growth, and purity of mind, as it grows with its roots in dirty, murky waters, yet blooms into a beautiful flower. And yeah, I can't think of a more fitting setting to find these flowers, in a pool above a hellish cavern. Your waters just don't get more murky than that. Now, just as a disclaimer, I'm not Buddhist, nor am I an authority on the subject. This is just stuff I found in my research for this video, but I think it's really interesting, and it's implemented into the dungeon design really well. The music here comes in 2 forms, one for upstairs and one for the dark basement below. The first theme has such a full-bodied, ethereal quality to it. It's got this chimey bell sound that just makes me feel so at peace. I encourage you to have good headphones or speakers and just listen to this for yourselves. There's something about this calming music that also seems to have this curious, quizzical sound to it. It's not a total jam of a song like, say, the Earth Temple, but it provides the perfect ambience for this dungeon and is truthfully just a well-crafted, great piece of music. The music for the basement, on the other hand, is, well, the opposite. Rather than a full-sounding, pleasant, ethereal theme, we get this dark, distorted, hollow-sounding rendition of the song. It's not quite as high up there in the creepy factor as, say, the themes from Ocarina of Time's Shadow Temple or Icana Canyon from Majora's Mask, but the point of this song is to stand in direct contrast to the dungeon's main theme upstairs, and it nails that. Okay, let's talk progression. There's no foyer here, so as soon as we enter the dungeon, we'll be in this large central room with the giant Buddha statue. Like all of Skyward Sword's dungeons up until now, the Ancient Cistern is going to heavily revolve around weaving our way in and out of this central room. And it works really well in this dungeon in particular due to just how memorable this central room is with the huge statue here. Immediately in front of us is a door to the interior of the statue, however, it is locked. Beside the door, however, is a stone tablet with a hint. It says that there are inscriptions which reveal the secret order of the temple. The hint says first the back, then the rear, that's the butt, then the back of the right hand, and finally the back of the left hand. Sure enough, on the back of each hand and around the back of the statue, and yes, the rear, the butt, we'll find these inscriptions which each indicate a cardinal direction. So following the order of the inscriptions in that order that the stone tablet hinted at gives us up, down, left, then right. Remember that. Alright, so we've had a good swim around this room and seen this locked door which we can't proceed through. So we'll have to look around to see how we can make progress. If we hang a right from the dungeon entrance, we'll find this door on the eastern end of the room. There's a lever on the wall right beside it here, which unlocks the door so we can head on through. We'll We'll enter the eastern room and find ourselves on this balcony. We can drop down, and as we do, we'll land on one of these lily pads, which flips upside down upon impact. This is the dungeon introducing us to this concept that we can flip the lily pads over, so remember that we can do this. Looking around this room, we'll find a water pipe, which actually launches us up to this ledge and loops us back around to the door we came through, so ignore that for now. Instead, we can head down this hall, which has 2 Skulltulas to battle. Make sure you don't get caught in the webs here. If you haven't figured it out yet, there's a very easy way to kill Skulltulas by swiping upwards, which flips them over, then using a fatal blow while they're overturned. Easy. Turn the corner, and at the end of the hall, we'll find this locked door. The stone tablet here hints to use the dungeon's secret order to open the door, and sure enough, if we hit the 4 blue switches in the correct order, up, down, left, then right, it'll open. We'll find ourselves in this room filled with water and lily pads. There's some Skulltulas on the ceiling, but if we use the beetle to cut their webs, they'll actually drop into the water and drown. Easy kill. There's some vines to climb on these 2 ledges, which we can use to hop down onto these lily pads to flip them over. The correct one to turn is also hinted to us by this red rupee visible in the water behind it. That's a nice touch. If we flip it over and swim down this way that we just uncovered, we'll go down this narrow passage, breaking these barricades as we do, and arrive at this ledge. Heading through the door loops us back into the previous room, but up on this balcony where we can open this chest and grab our first key. Great. Now we can use this water spout on this pipe to loop us back up to this ledge and head back into the central room. We're off to a good start so far. I like how this section loops back on itself to cut down on any uninteresting backtracking. Okay, we can spend the key we just found on that door near the entrance and enter the giant statue's interior. We'll find this vertical shaft inside, and there's nowhere to go but down. So if we jump down, we'll be in this circular room at the bottom where we'll have our mid-boss fight. This pits us against a Stalfos, albeit a stronger one than the Stalfos we faced before. The battle pretty much starts out the same as what we've seen already, but after a few hits, he'll reveal that he has 4 arms and thus 4 weapons to battle with. Even so, he'll still leave at least one angle exposed to attack him, or at the very least an opening to stab through the center. Also a fun note, but if he strikes at you and you successfully shield parry, you'll disarm him. That is to say, you'll briefly knock his arms completely off, giving you an opportunity to strike. Once he's defeated, this door will open, and we'll find this chest with the dungeon item. It's the whip. The whip is a pretty unique item for Zelda. Its design fits the dungeon's light dark theme, with the bottom being this dark red and the top being a glowing blue. As per usual, we'll be locked in the room, needing to use the dungeon item to get out. In this case, there's these faucets, which we can use the whip to turn on, activating these water spouts. We can ascend up this room's 3 floors by doing this, but we'll hit the top and find the boss door. We don't have the boss key yet, so we won't be able to proceed further this way. So instead, we can take the middle door out of the central statue and back into the main room. Exploring back around this room some more, we can find this hook sticking out of the eastern wall just past the door we went in before. We can use the whip with this as basically a grapple point and swing across the gap here. This is not unlike the grappling hook in Wind Waker, though a bit simplified. On the next ledge, we'll find a chest with the dungeon map. Great. There's a room here that's gated off as well, but we'll come back to that later. If we press on a little further, we'll find at the western end of this room, this lever that is out of reach. We can stand on this lily pad, use the whip to turn over the next lily pad, so we can hop to that one, and use the whip to pull the lever. This shuts off the water flow from this fish statue, which reveals this entryway below it. Somewhat reminiscent of the dungeon entrance itself, actually. We can swim through the tunnel, and we'll come out into this western room. There's an optional chest around the back of the room here, and a Skulltula to battle. The path here is gated shut, but we can actually use the whip through the bars to pull a lever on the other side and open the gates. This next room has a few baddies, but what we'll want to do is swing across the gap with the whip, over to these vines, climb around this rotating pillar, pull this lever with the whip to open this gate, then swing across this gap as well. We'll end up in this alcove at the top of the room where we can activate this switch, which opens a whirlpool in the center of the room, so we can can hop in and get flushed down. This takes us into the dungeon's basement for the first time. We can drop the sculptulas on the ceiling into the water just like before in order to flip this lily pad and proceed. Swimming through the tunnel will seemingly hit a dead end as there's a locked door which we don't have a key for. However, the bokoblin on the other side of the fence here has the key that we need, so we can actually snatch it from him using the whip and head on through the door. Thanks for the help, buddy. Down the hallway here, we'll actually get a tease of where the boss key is. It's down in this pit, out of reach. That pit is actually directly below the giant Buddha statue in the main central room, so remember that for later. Next, we'll reach the end of the hallway and find this pipe, which takes us back upstairs. We'll find ourselves in the northernmost part of the dungeon, in that room behind the gate we saw when we found the map. We can actually open that gate now to go back into the main central room to make any backtracking easier. This northern room here is a pretty clever one actually. There's some lily pads in the water here, and just like earlier, there's a tease with a red rupee under this one. If we climb these vines up to this ledge and leap down onto the lily pad to flip it over, then we can swim down the tunnel. We'll reach this staircase which leads up to this ledge that we couldn't reach before, and we can activate this faucet switch with the whip to turn on this water spout directly under the lily pad that we just flipped. So now we can climb back up to that ledge, use the whip to flip the lily pad back over to its original position, and cross over the gap. Next we can head down the hall and open this gate, and we'll find ourselves on this balcony in the main central room. There's a new enemy type here called a Phoenix, which you can defeat by using the whip on its tail to ground it and deliver a fatal blow. From up here we have a pretty good view of the central room. If we hang a right, we'll find a series of vine walls to climb. We can climb up here to find an optional chest, and climbing further towards the western end of the room, we'll come up to this protruding section of the walkway. There's a faucet here to create a shortcut back up to this ledge if you need, and this large switch is on the wall which we can reach using the whip, which causes the giant Buddha statue to move. Not unlike the moving central platform in Snowhead Temple actually, except that it's got rooms on the interior like the giant central tower in the water temple actually. We'll see the bottom door of the statue lower into the basement room where we saw the boss key earlier. We can head into the central room interior, down to the bottom of the shaft again, and we can exit out that bottom door and find ourselves in the dark basement. Here's where we will encounter the cursed bokoblins. They're just undead bokoblins, and yeah, I think that pretty much speaks for itself. They're slow and not too hard to defeat, but if you have a sacred shield, then you can actually shield bash to momentarily give them pause and leave them vulnerable to attack. But if I'm being real, they're so slow that you really don't have to worry about it. We'll also find this pool of dark liquid, which, although never specified to be, in my own headcanon, is actually malice, just like we see in Breath of the Wild. Okay, there's a path that snakes left around the back of the statue, and we'll come into this room with this huge demon sculpture. It looks really creepy with its angry face and its two bony hands sticking out of the wall like this. There's a bit of a puzzle here, but here's what to do. You can fly into its eyes with the beetle and find a gem switch which will block the flow of malice from the statue's mouth. Now we can use the beetle to grab this bomb and fly it over to destroy this rock which was blocking the path. We can cross the pool of malice across these lily pads and use the whip to swing across this gap over to the ledge that we just unblocked. Great. Next, let's climb up the rotating pillar, climb around this second rotating pillar, and use this switch to change the direction that the pillars are all turning. Now we can safely cross here, follow along the path, climb around this third rotating pillar, turn the switch back to its original position to change the rotation direction back, then climb back around the pillar that we just came from, but the opposite way, and we'll land on this ledge, where at the end of the path, we'll find ourselves at the bottom of this pit filled with bones. Here's where that spider's thread story inspiration really comes into play. There's this single thread in the center of the room to climb up. Cursed bokoblins will chase us up, and if one catches you, then you'll have to shake him off. This is a short section, but man, the tension runs high. It won't take long though, and we'll make it back up to the first floor. We'll be on another ledge in the main central room, and pulling this lever will extend this walkway out over to the same large switch that we activated before. We can turn it back upright to return the giant statue back to its original position position so that it's no longer blocking the chest with the boss key. Now we can slide back down the thread into the basement room, and there's a drop back into that section where the statue just was. And in this pit of bones, we'll find this chest with the blessed idol. But no time to celebrate, the statue will start sinking back down, so just ignore all the enemies and run out of there. They'll all get crushed anyways, and this gives us a shortcut back into the giant Buddha statue's interior, so we can ride these water spouts all the way back up and use the blessed idol to open the boss door. Though by boss door I actually mean it just opens up the ceiling of this interior room, so we can actually take these stairs up and we'll be on the top of the giant statue. There's 4 of these switches to activate here, and by doing so it will raise the statue to its highest position, nestled right into this alcove in the ceiling. Now we can take this staircase up and head into the boss room. Upon entering the boss room, which itself is shaped like the inside of a giant lotus flower, we'll find our old pal Girahim. He'll be annoyed at us showing up again, so he'll ditch, leaving an opponent behind for us. This golden ancient automaton assembles itself and initiates the battle. This is Koloktos. His design fits the Eastern-inspired aesthetic of this dungeon perfectly. Supposedly, Koloktos was the guardian of this place, meant to keep out intruders. Now, bit of theory time, but based on the fact that he's in pieces when we first enter, with Girahim perched on top of him, it's possible that Koloktos had actually tried to battle Girahim to drive him out of the temple, only to be defeated. But now he's been cursed by Girahim, filling him with evil energy, perhaps being the first instance of technology being corrupted by malice, not unlike the guardians and divine beasts from Breath of the Wild. At least that's the impression I get here, as we see this dark purple substance within him. Now I'll be upfront, he's all well and cool looking, but gameplay wise, this is where Koloktos shines. This is my favorite boss fight in the game, and it earns that spot for just how fun it is. He'll take massive swings at you, and if you dodge correctly, his weapons will get stuck in the floor. So you can use the whip to latch onto his joints and tear his arms clean off. Oh, that's so satisfying to do. When he gears up for another strike, he'll briefly leave his weak point exposed, so you'll want to take the opportunity to strike. You may only get a couple of hits in before he reacts and protects himself again. Then repeat the process. Make sure to stay far enough away to be able to avoid his attacks, but also close enough that he'll still attempt to strike, and that you'll be close enough to duck in and hit that weak spot. After repeating this a few times, he'll change his tactics and move on to the second phase of the battle. Koloktos will tear himself free from the floor and resume the battle, but now with legs so he can pursue you. He grows a cage to protect his weak spot as well, and wields 6 blades. He really is trying to up the ante here, and I love it. However, the same tactic still applies. When he strikes, dodge away so his weapons get stuck in the floor, use the whip to tear his arm off, and disarm him. This will actually give us the opportunity to pick up one of his swords and turn it against him. Using his sword, we can hack off his legs and arms and smash apart the cage protecting his weak spot. Then go in for that weak spot to deal some damage. After a few hits, he'll reassemble himself and we can repeat the process. He may also summon in some cursed bokoblins to help him out, but they can be swatted away easily enough. They're actually weaker than the ones that we found in the basement, so they're more of a nuisance than anything else. This phase of the battle is why this is my favorite boss fight. Being able to disarm him, literally, and use his weapon against him, and just go absolutely nuts on him in an overpowered frenzy, while not being particularly difficult, is just pure fun. Nothing less than spectacle and fun. This is the kind of boss battle that's not really meant to test your skill so much as just being an absolute blast to do, and I never get tired of it. Once he's defeated, he'll completely fall apart, we'll get our heart container, and we can head into the next room where we'll find the first of the sacred flames. This one is Furor's Flame. Bathing your sword in the flame improves it, increasing its reach and sharpening it, so you now deal double the damage. Nice. What's that mark you got there? So that concludes the Ancient Cistern, my favorite dungeon in Skyward Sword. Looking at the map, it doesn't appear all that large or too long, but the rooms are all pretty sprawling and there's a lot to do here. The dungeon has some of my favorite themes, architecture, and music. It has a lot of ideas going on here, and a lesser game developer could have gotten all of these ideas conflated and created a mess that lacked cohesion, but they pulled it off. They crammed all of these brilliant ideas into one deeply inspired dungeon and did it with grace. This dungeon is a great way to usher us into the game's second act, and it's absolutely a high point of the game for me, though I do still have a few complaints. First off, the doors share their design with Skyview Temple, and I guess it would have been nice for it to have a unique pattern of its own, though ultimately that's barely a complaint, and I may not have even noticed this if we didn't have to retread that dungeon for some reason right before coming here. I do sort of wish the dungeon were a bit longer, but it is still a reasonable length. I guess I just love my time here so much that it's sad when it comes to an end. I also feel like the whole dungeon secret order idea could have been better implemented. When it's first teased out to us, it sounds like it's going to be super important, but it's really just used to unlock one door and that's it. Even if there were just one more puzzle that made use of it, that could have alleviated the issue. These complaints are super minor though. My biggest gripe really just comes from how long it takes to get here, but that's all stuff that's outside of the dungeon, so it's sort of a moot point. Overall, the Ancient Cistern is a fantastic dungeon. It does nearly everything right and then manages to cap it off with what is, in my opinion, the most fun boss battle in the game. I can't sing my praises to the design of this place high enough. It's just a beautiful, serene place, and I can't help but love it. So far, on our quest to temper our sword in the 3 sacred flames, we have already conquered the Ancient Cistern and found Furor's Flame. Just like before, there are some errands to run before we visit the next dungeon. But I'm happy to say that these aren't nearly as egregious as the fetch questing we had to do last time. We'll return to the Isle of Songs in the Thunderhead, learn a new song, and douse to find this trial gate in the Lanayru desert. There's a Silent Realm challenge just like before, which I personally find to be pretty fun. I've heard that a lot of people find these Silent Realm trials to be quite stressful, but I won't lie, I just find them exhilarating, and a great shakeup from the usual Zelda stuff. After completing the trial, we'll be rewarded with a new item, the Claw Shots. These items return from Twilight Princess, even coming as a pair. Right away, we'll find these Claw Shot targets all around the desert, which we can use to find treasure and reach new areas that we couldn't before. Specifically, this ledge on the far western end of the desert, which takes us into this cave, where this Goron guy will give us a key to the door that's right there. All so that we can reach the Lanayru Sand Sea. Like the desert before, which used to be a lush green landscape, this area was once a vast ocean, but after centuries the sea dried up, leaving this barren landscape behind. And man, the music here is just fantastic. It perfectly captures the melancholic feel of this great environment changing into a barren wasteland over time. We'll find a boat with a timeshift stone on it, just like the timeshift stones that we found in Lanayru mining facility, which when activated not only creates a timeshift area of effect, but also brings back to life this little robot dude. This is Skipper, who tells us that he was captain of the protector ship that held Nayru's flame, which just happens to be one of those 3 sacred flames that we're looking for. However, his ship was stolen by pirates and is probably invisible since it had a cloaking ability. So we team up with Skipper to find his ship. We can set sail from the dock here and sail the boat across the Sand Sea. Wind Waker mode engaged. The first stop is Skipper's retreat, where we'll need to ascend up to Skipper's home at the top of the cliffs using the claw shots so that we can find his sea chart. This area is one of those spots in the game that really tugs at your heartstrings. Also, is this Skipper's family? Are these their dead bodies? He has a child apparently. Is this his dead child? Anyways, after getting the sea chart, Skipper will suggest that we may be able to find clues to the ship's whereabouts by visiting the shipyard where it was constructed. It's a short trip there, and we can get into the main bay of the shipyard by riding these minecarts around Donkey Kong Country style. Inside the bay, we'll be searching the sand for clues when we accidentally uncover Molderak. Yep, another Molderak apparently made its nest here after the shipyard was abandoned, and we totally should have seen this coming since little Arakas have been all over the place here. We can defeat him the same way as before by slashing at his eyeballs, though since our sword has been upgraded since the last time we fought him, he should go down even easier this time. With no luck here, Skipper will suggest one last place to look for clues, the stronghold of the pirates who stole the ship. We can sail over there, and there's a bit of a mini dungeon with some great puzzles. We'll have to make our way through this stronghold, carrying this timeshift stone along with us. And there really is some fun puzzles along the way, as enemies and barriers appear or disappear depending on the timeshift area of effect. It's a really fun mini dungeon. Once we bring the timeshift stone back to its pedestal here, the structure around the dungeon's exterior, which is modeled like a giant shark mouth, will actually open up, revealing broken pieces of the ship's mast. With this discovered, we can now douse for the stolen ship. Skipper suggests that we use the cannon, as any impact to the ship will disrupt its cloaking ability, and sure enough, after hitting the ship enough times, it'll halt and become visible, allowing us to board. So I complained last time about the long slog of things to do before the last dungeon, and looking at my footage, it's almost the same amount of time spent doing things before this dungeon. There's an impromptu boss battle, a silent room challenge, some fetch questing, and even a mini dungeon-like experience. The difference though is that all of this stuff feels like it's actually working to propel you forward towards the dungeon. It all feels purposeful and has you exploring new areas instead of retreading old ones. And the reason behind doing these things is to find clues that lead you to the dungeon itself. It all just feels more meaningful and interesting in my opinion. You need to do this stuff simply to find the dungeon, rather than knowing the dungeon entrance is right here, but not being able to go in yet because this dragon is picky about her water. You could argue it's doing the same thing here, doling out these chores to us before the dungeon, but it just doesn't feel like padding here the way it did last time. This is the same idea, but executed right, and I appreciate that. I only wish they could have done it this well last time too, but I can't win them all, I guess. Anyways, with that out of the way, let's enter the dungeon. I mentioned last time that the Ancient Cistern was my favorite dungeon in the game, but this one comes in pretty close as my second favorite. The Sandship is an incredible dungeon, and a really unique one at that. It has my favorite mid-boss in the game, some great puzzles, and some genuinely tricky navigational challenges. This is one of the few dungeons in the game where I actually have to stop and think about what I'm doing, instead of just constantly being propelled forward, and I love the level of thoughtfulness put into the dungeon's layout. I love this concept of having this large ship be the actual dungeon itself, and the atmosphere here is really great. The ship is run down and in disrepair, and really nails that lifeless, mysterious ambience. Then, partway through the dungeon, a timeshift stone is revealed, allowing us to change the ship back to its past state, just like what we saw in Lanayru mining facility. However, that dungeon kept its timeshift areas of effect to either individual rooms or in these small areas. This time, the entire dungeon is affected, leading to some pretty fantastic puzzle solving and navigational challenges. Barriers differ between time periods, as some doors will be barricaded with barbed wires in the present or blocked by beams of electricity in the past, meaning you'll have to make sure you're in the correct time period to overcome certain obstacles. I love this stuff. It's like the game is bringing in the classic Zelda 2 world system, but keeping it self-contained in the dungeon itself, and it's executed so well. These two eras are once again contrasted really well well with their visual design. I'm always surprised at just how colorful the Sandship was in the past, especially when you compare it to its rundown present-day state. There's a huge amount of detail on pretty much all of the flooring and every wall of this place, and it looks fantastic. Most notable are these patterns and symbols which line the ship's many rooms and corridors. They honestly could have just made the entire place wooden planks and gotten away with it, but they really went the extra mile to give the ship a distinct, colorful visual identity, and I love it. The architecture overall is just genuinely great. I love how believable this place feels as a proper vessel, as if all of its rooms have an actual purpose on the ship. There's the main deck with the masts, the captain's cabin, a brig, 2 power generator rooms, and an engine room full of moving machinery. It really feels like they planned out the floor plan of a ship first, and then designed the dungeon progression around that, making the rooms all feel like they belong. Nothing is out of place here, and it makes the feeling of immersion all the better. The enemy types here also help with this contrast. In the past, the ship is defended by a gang of bokoblins on the main deck, and mechanisms like Beamos down below, while in the present day, you'll find pests like the Araka and Keese. The music of the Sandship, much like Lanayru mining facility, changes to reflect its 2 time periods, with 4 different dungeon themes. 2 for the ship's exterior, 1 past and 1 present, and 2 more for the ship's interior, past and present as well. The ship's exterior present-day music is pretty bare bones, with these mallets and this twangy instrumentation. It has this mysterious hollow-sounding feeling, and it's a pretty sparse, slow-paced song compared to the other dungeon themes of the game, but it fits the desolate state of this place perfectly. Meanwhile, the past version of this song is actually pretty well the same, but adds some great string layers to fill in some of the gaps left by the sparseness of the main theme, which gives it a far more optimistic undertone. The 2 tracks are not too different, but it does allow these 2 themes to seamlessly fade in and out when activating the timeshift stone without it being jarring, which is great. In the ship's interior during the present era, we'll have a theme that is pretty complementary to its exterior counterpart. Though not as sparse, having a far more apparent melody, it still retains that eerie and mysterious feeling. There's one section of the song in particular that I really enjoy. It's hard to articulate exactly how it does this, but it just evokes in me this feeling of loss, which is a great fit for the stolen ship in its deteriorated condition. Then during the past state, the theme is once more filled out with some more robust instrumentation, with these shaker sounds filling in the gaps between the notes, and far more bass. It's great how these small, subtle additions to both interior and exterior versions of the tracks during the past state really bring the music to life. Again, these songs are far more subdued than the other dungeon themes up until now, but man does it nail the intended atmosphere perfectly. Alright, let's take a look at the progression. When we first enter, we'll find ourselves on the ship's main deck. There's several ladders which are all blocked off, so the only way to go is to head through these doors into the ship's interior. There's a locked door directly ahead of us, remember that, which we don't have a key for just yet, so we can instead head down the staircase below deck. To the left, we'll find a pointless hallway which leads to nowhere, but if we head down the hallway to the right instead, we'll find the next door. In this interior room, we'll see a treasure chest which is actually out of reach behind these bars. So remember that for later. There's also a spoon here to kill, and then we can cross this sink sand. We'll head down this corridor, which has 4 doors, 2 on each side, which are all barred shut. So all we can do for now is head further downstairs into the depths of the ship. We'll now be in the second basement floor, and there's a stretch of hallway here which has a concerning number of Araka, just in case you were feeling too comfortable. Then we'll come out into this room where we'll actually find the boss door. However, it's blocked off by this barbed wire barricade, and on top of that, we don't have the boss key yet. So instead, we'll move on down the next hallway. We'll find ourselves in the ship's brig, which is mostly flooded with sand. Just a side note here, but here in the brig cell are the bodies of Skipper's crew, and that's just tragic. They had their ship stolen, their captain, who clearly they liked, thrown overboard, and then they were just left to die, locked in the ship's brig. Damn. There's a locked door with a 4-button combination lock, just like the one we saw back in the Ancient Cistern. And if we use the gust bellows to clear out the sand covering the floor here, we can actually uncover the symbols which reveal the order to strike the lock and open the door. Just make sure to keep your point of view oriented with the red spokes on the symbols facing upwards, which is indicated by the 2 symbols on either side of the door here. The order in which to hit the switch is also indicated by the number of red spokes on these symbols. So if we follow that order, which is down, up, down, then right, the door will open so we can find this chest which contains our first key. Alright, so just a note about this section of the dungeon. We started on the first floor main deck, and the dungeon has essentially led us through the entire place down to nearly the very bottom of the ship in the brig, having us pass by all these locked doors and chests which are all out of reach. I think it's a nice way of getting us familiar with the overall dungeon layout. The ship isn't too big all things considered, especially when compared to the sprawling massive rooms of the previous dungeons, but there's a lot of crisscrossing to do here in these rooms and hallways. So despite the smaller size, they make great use of the space here and give you a lot to do as the dungeon goes on. It's good stuff. So we have a key now, and we've passed by a lot of locked doors on our way down. 6 if you include the boss door, but only one of them actually needed a small key to open. If you forgot which one that is, it's actually marked on the map as well. The one we need to go to is actually the first one we saw when we entered the ship's interior from the main deck. So we'll want to backtrack all the way back up to there, and we can spend that key on the locked door. We'll actually emerge onto the prow at the very front of the ship, where we'll encounter the dungeon's mid-boss. This barrier will rise from behind you, and the pirate who stole the ship will reveal himself. This is Skirvo. He's an ancient robot like the skipper, but he's a pirate. He's a pirate robot. A pirate robot in a Zelda game. Do you remember how I criticized the Scaldera boss battle back in the Earth Temple for being somewhat unengaging and not making good use of the narrow arena? Well, this mid-boss achieves everything that I wish that boss fight had. We have to battle Skirvo in this narrow arena. You don't even have room to strafe. A spiked barricade is behind you, which will move closer to you every time you damage Skirvo, decreasing the amount of space in the arena. And the battle operates as a reverse sort of tug of war, meaning you need to force your opponent to the pit at the end of the arena while not being forced back into the barricade behind you. Again, reminiscent of the Crocomire battle from Super Metroid. But it's a one-on-one sword duel to boot. It's absolutely awesome. Some well-timed shield parries will help you immensely in this battle, as they'll always open Servo up to attack, while not compromising on the space of the arena itself. Remember, you need to stand your ground and force him back. So if you flip back out of the way to avoid his attacks, you'll actually give him the advantage. Your best bet is to continually stab at him, rather than directional slashes, and parry when he strikes, and you should be able to force him back to the ledge. The first time you do get him to the edge, he'll drop his sword. However, he pulls out a backup. Force him back to the edge again, and you'll break his arm clean off. But he'll still try to fight you using his big hook hand. And forcing him back a third time will shove him off the ledge, finally defeating him. Humorously, Fi will remark that she admires his tenacity staying alive all of these years, which is actually a fair point considering all the other robots died out. With the mid-boss defeated, we'll be rewarded with the dungeon item. It's the bow. In the past, I've been critical of the bow in Skyward Sword, namely the slowness of using the bow. I'm happy to say that while using the button controls of the HD version of this game, these criticisms are mostly put to rest, but I still am not a fan of the weird zoom in that the bow does when aiming. I'm sure it's meant to just make aiming easier, but if the camera just didn't move while I was aiming, that would be easier, honestly. You also can't do this auto aim while targeting enemies in this game, and that kind of ruins some of the usefulness of the bow in combat, but oh well. Alas, the bow is functional and a serviceable dungeon item. It's not fantastic for combat, but the dungeon is mostly going to make use of it for puzzles, so I'm good with that. It is kind of surprising how late in the game we get such a staple item though. Alright, with the bow in our hands, Fi will hint at us that we can use it to hit these eye switches around the ship, which comes as a surprise to nobody, I'm sure. If we return to the main deck of the ship, we'll see one of those very switches here on the ship's mast, and if we shoot it, a timeshift stone will be revealed at the top of the mast. We can use the bow to strike and activate it, and the ship will be transformed into its gorgeous past state. Now, you may have seen these little piles of bones around the ship while exploring as well. Naturally, those spring back to life, populating the main deck with bokoblins, one of which will actually turn this mechanism to close these shutters around the timeshift stone. So that's our next objective. We can snipe most of the bokoblins with the bow, or just take them on up close. But either way, we'll need to climb the ladder up the mast, which is no longer blocked off. This only takes us up partway, so we'll need to ride these zip lines up to the top. There's eye switches to shoot to bring these zip lines to our position, and then we can grab hold and ride them along the line. We'll find this bokoblin at the top of the center mast, which we can defeat, then turn that same mechanism to open the shutters around the timeshift stone. This is important to do, because we'll need that stone accessible to be able to alter the time state of the dungeon. Once that's done, Skipper will actually come up to the ship, thanking you for returning the ship to its former glory, and suggests that the next course of action be to rescue the crew from the brig. Those were the dead bodies we saw earlier, though we're in the past now, so they should no longer be dead. Before we do that, however, if we use the claw shots over here at the very rear of the ship, we can actually drop to this ledge and find a treasure chest which contains a piece of heart. With that, we can now claw shot back up to the main deck. We'll actually find a locked door on the upper deck here, which we couldn't access before in the ship's present day state. But we don't have the key for that door yet, so let's just remember that for later. For now, let's take Skipper's suggestion and head down towards the brig. We can head into the ship's interior and take the exact same route as before all the way down to the brig, though there are some differences inside the ship now, such as different enemies and a lack of sink sand in this spot. The layout is otherwise the same though. We'll fight these bokoblins down in the brig and find the crew locked in this cell. However, the cell door is blocked by these energy barriers. One of the crew members will give us a hint stating that we can open the back door to the cell by activating the ship's 2 power generators, even giving us 2 little X's on the map showing where these generators are. Now we can backtrack again and head up to the first basement floor, and where we'll want to go is that hallway with the 4 doors, one of which is actually no longer barricaded. And if we head through the door here, there actually isn't much we can do yet, but you can move this block to press down this switch, which opens the 2 windows on the side of the room, which we'll need open for later, so keep that in mind. Next, we'll want to duck into this side room near where the sink sand was. This side room was actually barricaded in the present day, but it isn't now, so we can head into there. But that treasure chest there is still out of reach. However, there's an opening in the ceiling here, so we can actually shoot the timeshift stone through the bars from here, changing the ship back to its present day state, which removes the electric barrier. So we can now open the chest here and get ourselves the dungeon map. It's again a bit odd how late into the dungeon we get the map, since we've already explored almost the entire ship, but oh well. While we're down here in the present day state, we can duck back down the hall, and you'll notice this ventilation fan in the wall which is no longer spinning. So we can actually shoot an arrow through the hole here, activating the eye switch in the adjacent room, which unlocks the door. We can head into this side room, move this block aside so it's not in the way of this ventilation fan, then go stand on this switch, which opens another shutter in the adjoining adjoining room here, and will be lined up perfectly to shoot the ice switch right over there, which unlocks the door to that adjoining room. Now we can duck into the hall and head through that door we just unlocked. And there's nothing we can do in this room. Actually, this is one of the power generators that we need to activate, but we can't turn it on in the present day. So let's head back to where we found the map, then activate the timeshift stone again to change it back to the past, then head back to the room that we just unlocked and turn on the power generator. One down, one to go. The other power generator is the one that always trips me up. But remember how we opened that window in the side room before? What we'll want to do is return to the main deck, and we'll find this lifeboat on the side of the ship. So first, shoot the timeshift stone to return to the present, then shoot the switch here while in the boat to lower it down so that it's lined up with the window that we opened earlier. Now we can hop into the window and we'll be able to head into this adjoining room, which would be blocked with an electric barrier if we were in the past. Then in the adjoining room, we'll see a grate in the ceiling through which we can activate the timeshift stone again and now turn on the second generator. That sounds pretty simple, I guess, but if you didn't already know all of this, you would just keep hitting obstacles and barriers. With both generators turned on, we can now head into the engine room, which is accessible through this other window beside the lifeboat, where we'll find a ladder to climb down to the third basement level. There's a bit of obstacle coursing here as these big tape cassettes. The big machinery with these pistons in the engine room will shift up and down, and you'll want to duck under them and avoid being crushed. There's a gap to swing across here with the whip, and if we head into this side alcove, we can actually climb up this ladder into this little secret room, which was visible through a fence near the boss door, where we'll find 5 optional treasure chests. In these chests are some mid-tier treasure and some cash, nothing to write home about, but still not a bad secret that isn't too out of the way to get. Back in the engine room, there's some more of these cassette tapes of death, specifically this set of 3 to sprint under, and then these 2 which we'll want to swing over and land on top of with the whip, then jump across to the top of the second one to reach the ledge here. There's a switch here to open the gate and create a shortcut so that we never have to go through there again, and we'll find a crawl space, then a ladder, and we'll be able to open the back door of the brig, freeing the crew. That same crew member that we talked to before will give us a key and hint to us that the boss key will be in the captain's cabin, which is at the very top deck. Alright, let's backtrack through the crawl space, back through that window, through the ship to the main deck, and we can spend that key that we just got on the final locked door of the upper deck. But there are electric barriers in the captain's cabin blocking our way, so make sure to deactivate the timeshift stone real quick before heading inside. Now in the present, we can pass through that barricade, and once in the small room, we can shoot through the bars in the ceiling again to hit the timeshift stone. Now we can fight this Beamos, who you can now one-shot with the bow, by the way, and if you stand on this switch, a shutter will open, so we can again shoot the eye switch in the adjoining room to unlock the door. Next, head through, dispatch the 3 Beamos, and we'll be able to open this chest and get the squid carving. Interesting choice of boss key. Some foreshadowing maybe? From here, it's pretty straightforward. We already know where the boss door is, so we can head outside, go below deck, and over to the boss door. Make sure you're in the pass state, otherwise the door will be barricaded. As usual, there's a 3D rotating puzzle, and then we can open the boss door. Just when you are ready for a boss fight, the game throws a curveball at you. Something starts attacking the ship from the outside. Giant tentacles start tearing the very ship apart, and we're forced to evacuate. As we do, giant tentacles will burst through the ship's walls, tearing holes in them, and if you're not careful, will even grab at you. You can use Skyward Strikes to cut them and get them out of the way. As we make our way back above deck, barrels will start rolling around and the ship will start to flood, adding some serious urgency. This escape sequence before the boss battle isn't too hard, but the build-up here is fantastic and genuinely tense. I love it. I remember playing this section of the game when it first released on Wii, and and being so hyped for this boss battle. Just what sort of dungeon boss are we in for here? What sort of creature could eviscerate this ship so quickly? Was it a kraken-like creature? A giant octo like the ones in Wind Waker? The ship is being torn apart. Do we get to do part of the boss battle in Skipper's boat, firing the cannon with the tension so high? Just what are we in for? Oh. Okay. Oh. This is Tantalus. Visually, the design of Tantalus is where he suffers the most. I frankly just don't find him threatening. He just looks goofy. Also, why are his suction cups on the wrong side of his tentacles? Gameplay-wise, Tantalus doesn't fare much better. This boss fight has such an adrenaline rush of a build-up, and then ends up being such a letdown. Maybe Koloktos and Girahim set the bar too high with their unique boss battles, but Tantalus had potential here that just isn't tapped into. I love the idea of a colossal beast capsizing the ship and having to take the fight outside. But in execution, this is the most cookie-cutter generic tropey Zelda boss in the game. I'll still place it above Scaldera for keeping you actually engaged in the battle, but even then it only barely sneaks in above that fight in my opinion. So, how do you think you kill Tantalus? If you guessed use the dungeon item, the bow, to shoot his very obvious weak point, his giant eye, you are the winner. Yep, avoid his tentacles using Skyward Strikes to cut them down, then when he emerges, shoot him in the eye so he'll be stunned, and you can go in and hit him with your sword. There is also a second phase to the fight where you have to climb up to the ledge here, and he replaces his giant tentacle attack with this new one where his hair tentacles now have mouths, but you can literally just stand still and slash repeatedly like this, and you'll be just fine. So this phase ends up actually being easier. Shoot his eye, slash with sword. Shoot his eye, slash with sword. Rinse, repeat. Wow, there was legitimately so much potential to shake up the gameplay and go into a really unique boss battle, but instead we got the most cliche boss fight of them all. What a disappointment. Once Tantalus is defeated, we'll get our heart container as usual, and this section of the ship will rise up to reveal the goddess crest, which we can activate to reveal Nayru's flame. So we can bathe our blade in the sacred flame once more. 2 down, 1 to go. So that's the dungeon. The Sandship is certainly more of a guided experience than other dungeons in the game. The skipper and the trapped crew will offer pretty specific objectives, even marking little X's on your map. But even still, I never found that to be intrusive to the level design. If anything, it adds to the immersion and believability of this being an operating ship. Even though the boss fight is probably the most disappointing one in the game, the rest of the dungeon more than makes up for that. The timeshift stone mechanics, which we previously saw in the desert, mining facility, and the pirate stronghold, get distilled down to what's important. It's simplified in a way since there is only one stone and it transforms the entire dungeon, but this makes the mechanic concise and understandable, and is used for some very refined puzzles, as the barriers in various rooms are all dependent on which era you have the ship in, and having just one single timeshift stone at the very top of the ship presents a sort of obstacle in itself, as you can't rely on each room to have a timeshift stone of their own like you could in Lanayru mining facility. It's great stuff. The bow is a late addition to our arsenal, but a welcome one. It's not exactly used in any innovative ways here, but there's already a lot of creative power going into the dungeon to compensate for that. Skirvo is my favorite mid-boss in the game. Fighting that guy is exactly the kind of boss fight that Scaldera should have been, and it's a genuinely thrilling and exciting duel. The lead up to the dungeon itself, while still having a comparable amount of tasks as the previous one, feels a lot more like the game is propelling you forward towards your goal rather than offering padding. The architecture here is just so cool, and I just love the concept of this massive ship filling the role of a dungeon. And even though they missed some opportunities with the boss fight, having this escape sequence while the ship gets torn to pieces was a really nice change of pace and a welcome surprise. Between these things and those brilliant timeshift stone based puzzles and the navigational challenges here, I seriously believe this dungeon is near flawless. flawless in its execution. The only thing, aside from the boss fight, that I might complain about is that it sort of makes no sense how unlocking certain doors in the present would affect those doors in the past. It should only work the other way around. But this is a video game and I'm just gonna chalk it up to time travel shenanigans being weird. The dungeon overall may be held back by an underwhelming boss fight, but despite that, the rest of the dungeon is so good that it still manages to hold the spot for my second favorite dungeon in Skyward Sword. It's no secret, I like it a lot. So far, on our quest to temper our sword in the 3 sacred flames, we have already found Farore's flame in the Ancient Cistern and Nayru's flame aboard the Sandship. 1 flame is left to find, and based on how we found the previous 2 in extended areas off of the provinces that we've already visited, well, you can probably guess where the final flame is. But first things first, just like before, we have some things to do before we get to the dungeon. We can return to the Isle of Songs and learn a new song once more, then head down to Elden Volcano and complete the 3rd Silent Realm trial. The Silent Realm. Oh yes. Doing so will reward us with the Fire Shield earrings, which prevents taking damage from extreme heat, much in the same vein as the red tunic from Ocarina of Time. There's a tunnel near the summit of the volcano, which we can now safely pass through, and we'll run into our old pal Gorko the Goron. He's investigating these old ruins, but can't get past the fire barrier here. So what we can do is duck over to this spot just outside and fill a bottle with water, then pour it on this frog statue to quench his thirst, which dispels the fire barrier. Then do the same thing in the next room, except we have to pour the water down from this ledge up here. Simple enough. We'll finally reach the dungeon entrance, but this time the frog statue is much larger, and we'll need something bigger than one of our bottles to be able to extinguish the final barrier. So the game is just padding things out again. Fi will now let us douse for a suitable vessel, and we need something large enough to carry a lot of water in. If you haven't guessed it already, the item we're looking for is the water basin that we previously saw Faron taking a bath in. We can return to Faron province to ask her, and she'll allow us to borrow it. We'll have to call Scrapper to carry it for us. However, upon our descent back to Elden Volcano, Scrapper decides to be an absolute prick and flies down to the foot of the volcano instead. And then for some reason, he can't just fly back up and descend back to the correct location. He's just like, nah dude, we're doing this the hard way. So what we have now is an escort mission. We have to guide Scrapper all the way up from the foot of the volcano over to the summit, and all the while defend him from enemies. A task which is made even more unbearable by the fact that he's just kind of a jerk about it the entire time, and he won't shut up. We also can't use any of the shortcuts that we've made for ourselves to get up the mountain either, such as this updraft. No, we have to go the long way. All the while, Scrapper's going to be complaining constantly, telling us to slow down and whining about monsters. Am I going to deal with them? Scrapper, what does it look like I'm doing? Eventually, we'll make it back up the mountain and he'll dump the water onto the frog statue, which removes that final barrier, much to Gorko's excitement. So, some thoughts about this section of the game. When comparing it to the previous pre-dungeon sections, I feel like it falls somewhere in the middle for me. There's certainly less to do here than the previous 2 dungeons, and it's not as egregious as the stuff before the Ancient Cistern, but it's also not as fun as the stuff before the Sandship. The escort mission is just an annoyance, but it thankfully doesn't last too long. Otherwise, there's no boss fight or mini dungeon to do here, just that Silent Realm trial and this little fetch quest turned escort mission. But still, I just don't have nearly as good a time as I do during the lead up to the Sandship. Oh well, with all that annoyance out of the way, let's head into the dungeon. We've reached the penultimate dungeon, the Fire Sanctuary, home of the last sacred flame. I haven't exactly kept it secret that the previous 2 dungeons were my 2 favorites in the game, and while there is a lot of good stuff going on in the Fire Sanctuary, in my eyes it fails at being a distinct and memorable dungeon, and there's one key reason for this. So far in Skyward Sword, or even in any other Zelda game, when retreading areas or exploring dungeons that repeat the same theme, the designers have ensured that they adhere to these themes while still making them distinct from each other. In Ocarina of Time, you have 3 pairs of dungeons that technically share their themes, but they all manage to be diverse and memorable. I don't think anybody gets dungeons like Inside the Deku Tree and the Forest Temple mixed up with each other. The same could be said about Dodongo's Cavern and the Fire Temple, or Jabu Jabu's Belly and the Water Temple. Typically, these have been contrasted with one being a more naturalistic environment, while the other being an artificial or constructed one. Both of these are technically water dungeons, but they're different takes on the water theme, so it doesn't feel redundant. Skyward Sword takes a only slightly different approach here. The 2 dungeons in the Faron region are Skyview Temple and the Ancient Cistern. Between the 2, Skyview leans more into the forest theme, but only barely. The Ancient Cistern tosses the forest theme out in favor of this brilliant blend of light, dark, and water themes. No overlap. The 2 dungeons in Lanayru Desert are the underground mining facility and the Sandship. Neither are really desert themed per se, but both have these time shift stones. Even still, the first is a factory and the other is a pirate ship, so despite sharing some mechanics, they're very distinct from each other. The 2 dungeons in the Eldin region are the lava-filled Earth Temple, which may as well just be a fire dungeon, right? And this one, the Fire Sanctuary. You see what I'm getting at here, right? There's a lot of gameplay mechanics to set these 2 dungeons apart, and architecture-wise, the Fire Sanctuary has a lot more open-air environments, such as these balconies, while the Earth Temple is entirely underground. But we shouldn't have to get into the finer details to try and pick apart what differentiates these 2 dungeons. The truth is, even among Zelda fans, I constantly see people get these 2 dungeons confused, and it's not hard to see why. More so than any of the other dungeons so far, this one feels like a retread, even though it's not. That aside, while playing through the Fire Sanctuary, it's actually a really fun dungeon. There's some returning mechanics from other games, such as these water droplets to create platforms in the lava, which is pulled right out of the Wind Waker, but even these returning ideas get their own twist. The Fire Sanctuary also happens to be the longest dungeon in the game, which makes sense considering we're nearing the end of the game itself, so having this be the longest and most challenging dungeon just feels right. This dungeon also puts a twist on the central room idea. Every other dungeon in Skyward Sword so far has had a pretty open central room, leading to some interesting navigational challenges. The Fire Sanctuary doesn't really. The closest thing to a central room is this open canyon, which these balconies cross over. They're all connected in a way. This is all one zone loaded in at once, and the entire dungeon is connected through the series of bridges, balconies, and walkways. However, these balconies are all closed off from each other. You can't emerge into this area and walk all the way to the other end. You have to go through each section in a linear fashion. This isn't a bad thing, by the way, just different from what every other dungeon has done. Because of this, the dungeon feels like a long and twisted linear path, and while parts of the dungeon do crisscross or loop back in on itself, it still feels more like a gauntlet of challenges. In a way, this brings Ocarina of Time's Fire Temple to mind, though it's not quite the same. The architecture here shares a lot of similarities with the Earth Temple, particularly with its color palette, but it loses a lot of the dragon motifs in exchange for these depictions of the sun, which can be found in the mosaic-like floor tiles, as well as on many of the doors and even as sculptures. The Earth Temple also had a lot of animal-themed imagery going on, and there is plenty of that here too, but not all the same animals. Sorry, weird third eye monkey, but you're gone. We've got some strange lion heads and a lot of these frog statues, but most noteworthy, there's a lot of images of birds. Lots of different kinds of birds. We've got these owls, we've got sparrows. I think these ones might even be loftwings, but it's a bit hard to tell. So we've got a temple that's largely open air with depictions of birds and the sun. They could have leaned further in this direction and made this a sky temple, and that would have set it further apart from the Earth Temple, but oh well. It is interesting comparing these dungeons, how they made the overall aesthetic so similar, but didn't really reuse a lot of assets. At first I thought the door pattern and frames were the same, but even those, while similar, are not exactly the same. So it's even more confusing to me. It's not a case of them rushing and just reusing stuff. Except for those weird torches, they're here too, and I still think they look out of place. But otherwise, they took their time to make all of these things, but deliberately chose to make them similar to the Earth Temple. Despite those similarities, there's a lot of cool architectural stuff going on here. Out in the open canyon section, there are these huge pillars which look like flames reaching up into the sky, which by the way are visible in the distance from this part of the mountain outside the dungeon. Also, the fencing along these balconies have these neat flame shapes and the little tips at the top of the fencing that make it look like they're lined with candles. They're not actually, but especially from a distance, it's a cool little illusion. Of note as well is that the fire sanctuary has a lot more green. There's overgrowth taking over some of the more ruined rooms, and even massive tree roots and branches. These are mostly just to tie in the water fruit, but they do add a nice splash of color to some of these rooms. So I have mixed feelings here. I really think the visual design of this place is solid, but I still wish it were more distinct from the Earth Temple. I find the music here to be kind of a weak point for this dungeon. I've liked almost all of the dungeon themes in this game and felt like they've been a good fit for their dungeons, but this one just falls short for me. It's not bad per se, I don't find it irritating like I did Lanayru Mining Facilities theme, but it's just sort of boring. It lacks the energy of the Earth Temple's theme, the ethereal ambience of the Ancient Cistern, the tense danger of Skyview, and the melancholic mystery of the Sandship. It doesn't really strike any emotion for me. It's just sort of there. I don't hate it, I just find it largely forgettable. Like, it doesn't really achieve anything. It's too bad because Skyward Sword overall has some really wonderful music. In fact, the music of the volcano summit just outside of the dungeon is a pretty tense piece. They honestly could have swapped those two tracks around, and it may have worked better that way. One last point I want to touch on is the magmas. We saw a lot of those guys during our visit to the Earth Temple, and they're back here, but even worse. They're constantly interrupting the gameplay, and sometimes I swear they just don't shut up. We have to rescue some of them in the dungeon, and I'm not opposed to that idea. After all, previous games have had us do just that and it not be a nuisance, but usually it's either a quick blurb and we move on, or they don't talk at all. These magmas though, oh, they just love to talk. Good God, they just love to talk. Oh God, stop talking. Alright, let's look at the progression now. We once more have a foyer room here at the dungeon entrance. Right away we'll encounter this gap in the path, which we can cross by using either the slingshot or the claw shots to hit these water fruit, which creates this platform. We can cross the lava and we'll encounter another gap. We can use this same method to create another platform here, but the door straight ahead of us is locked, and this time the lava is flowing like a river. So instead of just crossing the gap, we can actually ride the platform downstream. While riding, you can pick off these archer bokoblins with your bow, and then we'll reach the end of the river. We can hop off onto this walkway and take the stairs, and we'll find one more bokoblin to fight. Once all the enemies are defeated, this gate will open, revealing this chest which contains the key we need for that locked door. Alright, so far we're only one room in, and this dungeon has already taught us a new mechanic. First in this controlled setting, creating this platform, then adding to it with the flow of lava, and then sprinkling enemies into the mix. It's good stuff. Before we can head through the door, we'll be interrupted by this magma. Already? Okay, why already? Wow, stop talking. His name is Guld, and he's apparently the magma leader. He tells us a riddle about the dungeon, which will be important for later. It goes, look for the two statues that face one another, and jump into the mouth of the sleeping statues. Spending that key takes us into the first section of the open canyon area, which I guess is the closest thing this dungeon has to a central room. We can already see the boss door at the other end of the dungeon from here, but there will be a lot to do before we can get there. Alright, Alright, there's only one path to take, so we can head down the hall to the right here, fight these Keeson bokoblins, then head through the door. We'll be in this branching hallway here. To the left is an optional chest with some cash, and to the right we'll be brought into this round room. There's a new enemy type here called a Megmanos, which we actually can't defeat just yet. However, we can stand on this platform and he'll rise up from beneath us, giving us a boost up to this ledge. The path here loops around and brings us to this balcony where we can head through the next door. We'll be back outside in the open canyon room, and the bridge here will serve as an arena where we'll have to battle this dark variant of a Lizalfos. The method for fighting him is the same as the regular Lizalfos, but just watch out for his cursed breath attack, which will disable your weapons briefly. Once he's defeated, we can cross the bridge and head through the next door. This next room has some spoons and bokoblins, all of which you can snipe with your bow to defeat. This room has a pretty straightforward puzzle. The lava isn't flowing here, so we'll want to use the beetle to fly through the tunnels at the top of the room and grab a bomb flower. By the way, this is all hinted to you by the rupees, highlighting where these tunnels are. Then you can use the bomb to strike this statue, which releases the flow of lava. Now we can use the water fruit to create a platform and ride over to the other end of the room. We'll find two doors here, but one is locked, so we'll head into the other one. Here we'll find this Mogma named Silva, who was captured and is currently dangling over some lava. Unfortunately, there isn't much we can do to help him right now, so once he's done whining, we can explore the room. There's these sort of molten puddles on the floor, which we can cool and remove with the gust bellows, and we'll find a treasure chest here with a small key. As a side note, I really like that they placed these sand piles here to sort of hint to us to try out the gust bellows. It's a neat way for the game to show us that we can use it to cool these puddles without it outright telling us. Now that we have that key, we can head back into the previous room and go through that locked door. This room is something of a winding one, which has a lot of water fruit and overgrown grass, as well as some dig spots where we can find some rupees. The doorway through is blocked with flames, with a frog statue above it, just like the ones at the dungeon entrance. What we'll want to do is head up these stairs in this room, over to this balcony section, and use one of these water fruits, which we can toss with our sword, and it should land on the frog and extinguish the flames. While we are up here, there's another optional chest here, as well as one downstairs with some cash. Now we can head down the hallway we just opened, fight some more bokoblins, and head into the next room. This room is another Megmanos room, very similar to the one we were already in, but we can actually fight them this time. We can again stand on this platform to reach this ledge, grab a water fruit, then splash them to momentarily stun them, then strike them repeatedly to break them apart, which defeats them. Do this for both, and the lava will drain out of the room. Actually, based on the music here and the locked doors, I guess you could consider this the dungeon's mid-boss, right? Turns out this room is actually adjoining to the room that Silva was held captive in, just separated by this fencing, and so the lava has drained out from under him as well. There's a door here we can go through to return to that room, and we can pull this lever to release him. He'll talk a bunch, but as thanks for freeing him, he'll reward us with the dungeon item, the Mogma Mitts. The Mogma Mitts are basically an upgrade to the digging mitts that we already have, but instead of just digging in these dig spots, we can now burrow underground and go through these underground tunnels. They're a neat concept, but if I'm being honest, I just don't find these underground sections very fun. They're just kind of slow and cumbersome, but it does open up some passageways that we couldn't take before. There's a spot to dig into right in this room, which actually takes us into the section below the adjoining room. We'll find a locked door here and a gated off hallway, but if we dig underground, there's a button to press here, which opens that gate up. Now we can head through the hallway, out the door, and we'll be out in this section of the open canyon. If you hang a right, you'll actually be able to press the switch to make a shortcut to the previous walkway where we fought that Dark Lizalfos. But otherwise, if we cross this walkway, we'll have to face off against a handful of bokoblin archers. The path here is crumbled, but you can cross using the claw shots and head through the next door. Here we'll find another captured Mogma. this one named Bronzy. There's a little bit of a puzzle in this room with these gates, but we can open them up by digging underground and hitting these buttons. Just make sure to open the left one first so that the way back isn't blocked off. Now we can head down this path, grab the water fruit, toss it at this frog statue, and extinguish the flames. In this side room is a lever which we can pull to free Bronzy over here, who has some confusing dialogue. First he says he'll help you by giving you information, then he says he won't help you, but then he decides to help you anyways, and then he sees Silva and just leaves. Alright then, either way, we'll be rewarded here with the dungeon map. Both Bronzy and Silva's dialogue here hint that there's a secret room somewhere behind a false wall. We can use the map here to see this secret room and which wall to bomb. Easy enough. Then we can dig through this tunnel, encounter a Moldorm, who you can defeat by striking his tail, and will emerge in another room. There's a treasure chest here with a key, and we can climb up these vines and we'll be looped back to the previous room. We'll need to backtrack now to that locked door that we saw earlier, and we'll emerge at the far northwestern section of the canyon. There's a lava river here, so we can use this water fruit to cross, head up the stairs here, and through the door. If we head down the hallway, we'll come to a gate, which we'll need to dig under to open. But then there's this little prick of a magma named Platz, who shuts the gate, mistaking us for a monster. And instead of just explaining to him in words that we're not a monster, we have to chase him. Yeah, that's gonna make him less scared of us. Once we catch him, he'll realize that we're not a monster and open the gate for us. He also leaves us this treasure chest with a heart piece. Feels kind of weird to just have it given to us like this, but okay. Now we can use this water fruit to make a platform and cross over to this balcony here. There's a switch which opens a shortcut back for us, and another underground section where we use this bomb to destroy this rock and open the flow of lava. Wait, open the flow of lava? Of course, with the lava now flowing towards us, this triggers an escape sequence. It's a short sequence, and you just have to sort of sprint crawl out. Just don't bother going for that stamina fruit, and you'll be just fine. Now that the lava is flowing, we can use the water fruit to make another platform and ride it down the river here. We'll shore up on the next walkway and head up the stairs, and we'll actually make it to the boss door. However, we don't have the boss key yet. So this walkway here splits into 4 directions. The western way is where we just entered from, the northern one has the boss door, and the eastern one just leads to this gate. So it's a dead end. So the only way to go is south. There is a stone tablet here which labels this as the Bridge of Decision, but otherwise this southern one seems to be a dead end also. However, you may notice that as you approach the end of the bridge, the camera automatically shifts to look downwards. This is where the riddle from the start of the dungeon comes into play. There's these 2 statues at the bottom of the canyon, and the riddle said to jump into the mouth of the sleeping statue. So just go ahead and jump off the bridge, and aim for the statue that has its eyes closed. It's something of a leap of faith, but as we approach the bottom, a platform will actually materialize for us to land on. It's a pretty cool moment. Maybe just try to stick the landing better than I did. There's a short hallway here, and then we'll end up locked in this room where we'll have to face off against 2 dark Lizalfos. But these guys aren't too hard. Just use the same battle tactics as any previous Lizalfos encounters, and you'll be alright. Once they're defeated, the doors will unlock, and we can move on. Next, we'll have to trek up this long, winding spiral staircase. There is an alcove in this room with an optional chest, but otherwise we can just head for the top. Most of the gaps in the staircase can be jumped across, but there is one here that you'll need to use the claw shots for. Once we're at the top of the stairs, we can head through the door and we'll be in this dark room, which has the chest with the boss key. However, it's behind some bars, so there's a pretty simple puzzle here. We can burrow under the room, and while underground, there are these buttons to press which light these torches. As hinted at by this stone tablet, you just have to light the torches in the order of the amount of wings that each statue has. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This will open the gate blocking the chest, but will also release this Moldorm, so we'll have to fight him too. Just hit his tail a few times to defeat him. If he's moving too quickly for you, you can trick him into charging at you, and then when he hits a wall, he'll be momentarily stunned, giving you an opening to attack. Once he's defeated, we can head out and open this chest to receive the mysterious crystals. Okay, were you guys just running out of ideas for boss keys at this point? The door here will actually loop us back to the boss door. We just have to open this gate and then walk back over there. As usual, there's the 3D rotating puzzle, and then we can head into the boss room. One final thing to mention, anytime after getting the magma mitts, you can actually backtrack over to this room and kill that first Megmanos that we encountered. Doing so will open a path so we can find this optional chest, which actually has an empty bottle. Bottles are pretty valuable items in Zelda, but I didn't mention it before because I almost always forget to go back for it. They placed it in such an awkward spot, it's located right here, that you either have to go back in after finishing the dungeon or just awkwardly backtrack there. It's not the worst thing in the world, but still pretty out of the way. Anyways, with all of that done, let's head into the boss room. Guess who it is? Our old pal Girahim. He's surprised to see us alive, but remarks it's no coincidence. We're bound by fate. But Girahim wants to chat for a bit before we fight. He points out the drawings on the walls in this room, which show both gates of time. The one Impa destroyed in Lanayru Desert, and the one we need to activate in the sealed grounds. This has put him in a better mood, since a second gate will allow him the opportunity to find Zelda. So Girahim extends an offer to us. He says he'll spare our lives if we tell him where he can find the second gate of time. Link naturally refuses, so Girahim decides he wants to do the whole murder thing after all, but not before showing off his, supple skin. Okay, so the boss fight this time is a rematch against Girahim, who we previously battled in Skyview Temple. I have to say for the record that Girahim is freaking nuts, and I love every moment that he's on screen. His dialogue is the perfect combination of charming and sadistic, and the way he licks his sword after landing a hit on you is just so creepy in the right way. He just takes so much pleasure in violence without being some mindless beast, which makes him such a perfect villain. The fight is a lot like the previous one back in Skyview, but with some added challenge. During the first phase, he'll again try to catch your sword, so you'll want to psych him out by holding your sword in one direction, then actually striking from the opposite way. He'll summon these floating daggers to protect himself, which appear to be Japanese kunai. And oops, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. But as long as they're not in the path of your sword swings, then you'll be able to land your hits on him just fine. If he sends those kunai flying at you, you can deflect them back at him. After dealing enough damage, he'll draw a pair of sabers to duel you properly. In this phase, he'll employ a variety of attacks against you, including launching waves of kunai, which you can deflect with your sword, or he'll just attack you with his sword straight on, which can be countered with a well-timed shield parry. Like the previous Stalfos battles that we've done, he'll guard in two directions, leaving a side open to attack. Easy enough. He'll also do an attack in which he'll teleport into the air and slam down at you from above, but as long as you do a flip back out of the way as soon as he teleports, you should be able to avoid this just fine and strike back. He's just so much fun to fight. The one-on-one sword duel just feels like it was meant for Zelda, and Girahim is just so satisfying to land hits on. Most enemies just have this sort of bludgeoning sound, but landing a hit on Girahim has this particular feel to it that's unlike any other enemies in the game. And considering the repeated encounters with Girahim throughout the game, it just makes it more personal. Keep at him enough, and he'll withdraw from the battle out of frustration. Well, maybe frustration's not the right word. He'll be pretty furious. So in a way, this is the equivalent of the dungeon boss rage quitting the battle. He'll teleport away, and as usual, we'll get our heart container. Then find the final sacred flame. Din's Flame. Now that we have bathed our blade in all 3 sacred flames, it reveals its true form. Congratulations. We forged the Master Sword itself. So that's the dungeon. Overall, I think my memory has been too hard on the Fire Sanctuary. The dungeon actually does a lot of fun stuff. The architecture is really wonderful, fighting Girahim is always a treat, and the dungeon really feels like a shakeup in terms of how you progress through it, giving us a more gauntlet-style approach rather than the big central room-based progression structure that the game has used up until now. There's genuinely a lot of fun moments, but ultimately it still falls short. It's preceded by 2 totally amazing dungeons, and while many of the dungeon aspects here are good, most of them don't quite feel amazing. Aside from some of the architecture and that boss fight, most of the dungeon feels pretty forgettable because it fails to stand out. There are some other gripes I have as well. For starters, this riddle sounds pretty cool, but is ultimately pretty inconsequential. It's told to us at the start of the dungeon, but even if you forget all of that, you could just take a leap of faith, and there's a 50-50 chance you'll be right. You could have replaced this whole conversation with a stone tablet somewhere, and it wouldn't make a difference. Which brings me to my next complaint, the Mogmas. I'm not opposed to the idea of having NPCs in dungeons, or having to rescue NPCs in dungeons, or the idea of those NPCs giving you the map or the dungeon item, but do they have to make these guys so annoying? Those voice clips are like nails on a chalkboard to me. And the text here just goes on for too long in some of these encounters. Stop talking. But aside from those things, most of this dungeon is not a bad time. I wish it was more distinct and that it had better music, but in the end, it's far from a terrible dungeon. As bad as it sounds, the biggest thing to hold against it is that it just isn't as good as the other dungeons in the game. But I guess that doesn't mean it's bad either. Overall, while I didn't love it, I still enjoyed my time in the Fire Sanctuary. I think it's definitely a worthwhile dungeon, and while it could have done some things a little bit better, it still presents us with a pretty fun challenge before the end of the game. This is it, the final dungeon of Skyward Sword. But first is the matter of getting there, so buckle up because there is a lot to do before the game's finale. We have successfully tempered our sword into the Master Sword, which means we can achieve our goal of activating the Gate of Time, but not before another battle against the Imprisoned, this time with arms. We'll also find that Groose has constructed this rail-based catapult and will assist during the battle here by flinging giant bombs at the Imprisoned's face. Nice. Though the battle goes pretty much the same as last time. Beat the spike down into his skull a few times and he'll be resealed. Now we can head back to the temple and activate the Gate of Time. Doing so will allow us to travel back in time through the gate to the ancient past where Zelda has gone with Impa. There's a pretty big dump of exposition here, but here's the gist. As explained in the game's prologue, the goddess Hylia had once battled the Demon King Demise. She could only seal him, and knowing he would break free, she devised a plan. First, she created Fi to act as a guide to her chosen hero. Then, she shed her divine form and reincarnated herself as a mortal. If you haven't put the pieces together yet, well, Link here is that chosen hero, and Zelda is the goddess Hylia reborn. She blesses the Master Sword, unlocking its true power, and then puts herself in a coma, which will keep the seal on Demise intact, which it mostly has, but Demise just happens to be that imprisoned monstrosity that we've had to beat back into submission twice already. So despite all of this, we will need to still put an end to Demise completely. In order to do so, we'll have to find the Triforce itself. Oh yeah, this is something the game has actually been teasing out to us, and it's even clarified in Zelda's dialogue. As we've completed the many trials and hardships through our adventure, we've slowly proven ourselves worthy of wielding that sacred power. We've proven our courage by facing our fears, wisdom by solving dastardly puzzles, and power by defeating terrifying foes and tempering our sword. Now, all that remains is to find the Triforce itself, which is said to have been sent up to Skyloft by Hylia along with the people of the surface all those years ago. So we'll have to find someone on Skyloft who may know of the Triforce's whereabouts. And who else would we consult but Headmaster Gipora, aka Zelda's dad. At first, he's of no help as he doesn't know the Triforce's whereabouts, but then he recalls that there is someone who may, the great sky spirit Levias, who should be found in the Thunderhead. So Gipora suggests that we speak to instructor Owlin to find out info on how to find Levias. Owlin will tell us that while we can find Levias in the Thunderhead, that something seems to be wrong with him. His usual joyful eyes are filled with malice, and Levias seems to attack all who draw near. Owlin suspects Levias to be possessed by some evil, and suggests that we have to go talk to someone else to find out more, specifically the owner of the Lumpy Pumpkin. But first, he'll teach us this spiral charge technique, which is pretty much the exact same as the dash attack that we already have, but okay. Going to talk to the owner of the Lumpy Pumpkin, he'll tell us that he usually gives an annual offering of pumpkin soup to Levias, but hasn't yet this year, and asks us to take a batch of soup over. Using Scrapper, we can carry the soup into the Thunderhead and drop it off at this Rainbow Island, which will cause Levias to appear. This initiates a 2-phase boss battle, and I kinda love it. Levias will have these tentacle eyeball things sticking out of him, which we can attack with our Loftwing. It's pretty straightforward, but Levias does move pretty quick for such a big guy. Once they're all done, we can dive onto Levias's back, and we'll have to deal with the second phase of the battle. The creature possessing Levias will reveal itself. This is Bilokite. During the battle, Bilokite will spit these sort of acid balls at you, which you can deflect back, but rather than using your shield parry to do so, you'll want to use your sword so that you can aim it in the proper direction. So in a way, this is your classic match of Dead Man's Volley, with a twist. You'll want to strike each side of his face once, then hit his eye, then go stabby stab time. Rinse, repeat. You can also just forego this and shoot him with your bow, but it's a little trickier to do so since you have to be quick. Not the most amazing boss battle in the game, but I love it for a couple of reasons. First, the fight actually makes use of your Loftwing. I love this big old bird, but he is so underutilized in the game, aside from just flapping around the sky between dungeons. Second, Dead Man's Volley is always fun. And third, it's just pretty cool to do a boss fight in the sky like this. The atmosphere and the music are pretty great here too. Once Bilokite is defeated, Levias will return to his normal, sane state of mind. He'll tell us that in order to find the Triforce, there's a bunch of stuff to do. We'll need to find the 3 parts of the Song of the Hero, which we can learn from the 3 dragons on the surface. You can do the 3 parts of this quest in any order that you'd like, but in short, you'll need to travel to the 3 provinces of the surface and find those dragons. I like to head to Lanayru first, which I'll explain why in a moment, but it's my favorite of the 3 regions. We'll run into this Goron guy who says he's uncovered a new path in that previous tunnel to where a dragon is said to live. Oh, hey, that's really helpful. Thanks, Not Gorko. We can enter Lanayru Gorge and find... oh, the dragon is dead. However, this is still the Lanayru province, which means there are sure to be some time shift stones around. If we follow this chain that he's holding, we can find a key which opens this door, through which we'll find a minecart with a time shift stone on it. We can activate it, causing the minecart to start moving, and there's this great obstacle course that circles around the gorge, which involves a lot of using the claw shots to keep up with the minecart. Eventually, it will circle back, and the time shift area of effect will be increased by this machine, encompassing the entire gorge. Now in the past, we'll find the Thunder Dragon Lanayru, who is pretty sick, hence him being dead in the present. He tells us that the robots had planted a seed nearby to grow a tree of life, but it can't grow in this region. However, we can take the seed, head to the lush Pharaon region, pass through the Gate of Time, and plant it in the past, so that in the present day, it's a full tree. Now we can harvest this giant life fruit and give it to Lanayru to cure him. He'll teach you his part of the song, and in addition to that, offer a side quest to you. You can do a boss rush challenge with him, which will earn us the Hylian shield itself, which is the only unbreakable shield in the game, so it's well worth getting, which is why I like to do this section first. I just want to get this thing as soon as I possibly can. If we head over to Pharaon before we go see the dragon, we'll actually have to battle the imprisoned for a 3rd and final time, which is the most thrilling of the 3 battles with him. Groose will actually launch you onto the imprisoned's head in order to drive the ceiling spike into it again. Oh, that's just fantastic. It's pretty pretty exhilarating. Groose will give us a lift into the woods and we'll find it to be flooded. We can swim into the inside of the great tree and find the water dragon, who will want to test us before teaching us her part of the song. Didn't we already help you and prove ourselves? Come on! So we have to swim around the entire flooded province collecting these tad tones. This is pretty easy, although somewhat tedious, though if you're having trouble with the long-term swimming, you can buy an air potion in Skyloft to give yourself a few extra minutes underwater without having to worry about drowning. Even so, the tad tones do refill your air gauge as you collect them, plus there's all these air bubbles around, so you'll be just fine without the potion. Once they're all collected, Pharaon will teach us her part of the song. Last is my least favorite section of this quest. If we head over to Eldin, we'll find the volcano erupting, which somehow causes us to be captured by bokoblins and stripped of all of our items. What the heck? Plants will show up and give us our magma mitts back, and then we have to do this lengthy stealth section. Okay, I know that our sword is gone, but why can't I just punch a bokoblin in the face with these mitts on? That would hurt. We'll have to sneak around the Eldin province gathering our equipment. Once we have it all, we'll find this cave where the fire dragon Eldin lives. We can use the beetle to cut these ropes and lower the bridge, just like in the Earth Temple, and learn the final part of the song from the fire dragon. Now, with all three parts of the song, we can return to Levias, who will teach us the song in its totality, which allows for us to douse for a trial gate, leading us to a Silent Realm trial here on Skyloft. Though if I'm being honest, maybe it's just due to the terrain not being all that dangerous, but this is probably the easiest of the 4 Silent Realm trials. Once the trial is completed, we'll be rewarded with this red gem called the Stone of Trials, which Fi tells us is one of a pair. We can find its match set in the eye of this statue, and inserting the stone in place here will cause the statue to open, firing a cannon at the Isle of the Goddess, which takes a moment before reacting. The isle quakes, stone breaks away, revealing the entrance to the dungeon right below the statue of the goddess where our journey began. We can use the claw shots here to make our way over and head into the dungeon. Finally. Welcome to Skykeep, the final dungeon in the game, as well as probably the most unique dungeon conceptually. Its progression structure is wildly variable, meaning your own experience and the order of rooms you tackle will probably be pretty different from playthrough to playthrough. The reason for this is, while many other dungeons have contained some great puzzles, above all else, this dungeon is the puzzle. Literally. And it isn't a simple one either. The dungeon is going to make you stop frequently just to think about and plan out your navigation, and it is wonderful. In about half of the dungeon's rooms are these consoles, labeled in Hylian script as control panels, where you can move these panels around. Each panel represents a room in the dungeon, so as you make your way through the dungeon, you have to rearrange the very rooms of the dungeon itself. Sliding block puzzles certainly aren't new to Zelda, but a sliding block dungeon? This is some next level creativity. If you know what you're doing, this can cause the dungeon to be pretty short. There's a total of only 8 rooms, but you can easily get lost and spend a great deal of time pushing these rooms around and hitting dead ends. Most of the progression can be done in any order, but there are a few exceptions. For example, you always will enter in the foyer room, and because of this arrangement, the second room will pretty much always be the same. There's also a single locked door in the dungeon in this room, so you have to make sure you go through this room, which has a chest with the key before that. Meanwhile, this room is gated off from the west side, meaning that you have to always enter from the east side. But aside from those few instances, the sheer flexibility of it all, the varying order of its progression, that's what I find so brilliant about this dungeon. The dungeon does what many Final Zelda dungeons do, which is infusing elements of all the dungeons we've done up until now, with each room containing elements from one of the dungeons we've already completed. However, there are 7 dungeons in the game, including this one, and 8 rooms, meaning some clever design choices have to be made to make up for that 2 dungeon discrepancy. And even then, some elements sneak into each other's rooms, like these statues that were only found in Lanayru province are in the Earth Temple themed room, and there are also underground tunnel sections in that room which were only found in the Fire Sanctuary. The Skyview Temple themed room mixes elements from Skyview with the architecture and structures from the Ancient Cistern. Meanwhile, another room is entirely dedicated just to that dungeon's basement, and another room seems to be themed after the inside of the giant tree in Faron Woods, but with a mid-boss fight that is pretty much the exact same as the one in the Sandship. So despite each room appearing at first to be based on one specific dungeon, it actually mixes a lot of these elements together to give us several rooms that are something more unique. These rooms also make great use of Link's entire arsenal, with the exception of the net and maybe the slingshot, which are the 2 items found outside of dungeons. Every other item gets put to use in some way in here, sometimes in familiar ways, sometimes combined with other elements. It's great. Architecture-wise, as I stated already, the rooms are all modeled after the previous dungeons, mostly. The foyer room, as well as a few special rooms, are their own, and shares their aesthetics with places like the Sword Chamber and the Isle of Songs, but here with depictions of the Triforce and the goddess Hylia. The Triforce appears on all the doors in a fitting gold mural. These torches have this winged design as well, which calls back to many of the save statues that we've seen, including this one in the foyer. But mostly, I just love these beautiful murals of the goddess. Aside from these few rooms though, it's all just callbacks to other dungeons with minor tweaks. I think I would have preferred it if the dungeon retained this distinct visual identity and aesthetic all throughout its entirety, perhaps retaining the diversity of gameplay mechanics, but keeping the architecture all in line and unified. But ultimately, the diversity of the architecture helps each room to stand out better, so it does make sense why they did this from a gameplay perspective. You more or less have to learn each room pretty well if you're going to make it through here, and so having them all be so distinct from each other makes a big difference. The music of Skykeep borrows the tracks of the previous dungeons with a couple of exceptions. It excludes my favorite track, that's the Ancient Cistern's upstairs theme, as well as the outdoor themes of the Sandship, but it has the rest of them, including the Ancient Cistern's basement theme, the Sandship's interior themes, and the tracks from the rest of the dungeons, the dangerous Skyview theme, the absolute bop that is the Earth Temple's theme, etc. These are all used in their corresponding rooms, of course. Meanwhile, the Skykeep's own rooms get their own theme as well. This brilliant, majestic piece. The track is incredibly mysterious and ambient, with high-pitched choirs carrying most of the weight here, but loads of companion instruments to round out the sound here, including what sounds like some harp strings to match your own harp. It's just got this very sacred and uneasy feel to it, and I adore it. Okay, let's talk about the progression through this place. Because of the nature of Skykeep, I'm going to present these rooms to you in mostly the order that I went through them during this playthrough, but that order is not a set order. You may tackle things differently, and that's sort of the beauty of it. I will say one thing as a tip though. When using these control panels to rearrange the dungeon, try to do so from a corner room. Whichever room you are in won't move. So if you're in the center of this 3x3 grid, then you're just going to be shuffling the rooms around like this and making no progress. Planting yourself in a corner and arranging the dungeon from there is your best bet. Okay, we'll enter this gorgeous foyer room with this Sky era architecture that I just adore. Right away in the center of the room, we'll find a chest which contains the dungeon map. Our objectives will be marked on the map right away, with these 3 golden triangles indicating where we can find the 3 pieces of the Triforce. So right away, we know where we need to go. It's just a matter of getting there. The gate ahead will open, giving us access to the first control panel, which we'll have to try out using right away, or we won't be able to make any progress, since the first door leads to nowhere currently. Based on the default layout, there isn't actually much we can do with this, aside from moving a couple of panels, but we can connect these 2 rooms, then head through the door. This takes us into the Skyview Temple themed room, though admittedly the architecture is more of a combination of the Faron Woods itself, mixed with the upper floor of the Ancient Cistern. The path branches here. The left path is gated, so we'll have to head right instead. There's some Dekubabas to fight, and we'll reach this chasm. Before you swing across, you'll you'll need to untether the rope on the other side, which you can do with the beetle. Then you can use the whip to swing over, catch the rope, and land on the other side. Battle this Skulltula, then we'll find some rotating pillars like we saw in the Ancient Cistern. You can snipe the Phoenix here with your bow, and before moving on you may want to deal with the Pyrups on the other end of the room, which you can defeat with either the bow or by using the beetle to grab a bomb and blow them up. Then hookshot over to the first pillar, then the second, then over to this platform. You can swing on this rope to reach the suspended platforms, which we can then use the gust bellows to move and jump over to the ledge. We can pull this lever to open the gate here, which creates a shortcut back to that first door, just in case we end up having to cross through this room again. Then let's head through the next door. If you moved both rooms already, then we should end up in the Lanayru mining facility themed room. Though it uses the architecture and theme music from that dungeon, its design is actually more akin to the pirate stronghold. There's a time shift orb that we'll need to carry through here to remove some barriers. Then we can open this hatch with the lever above and toss this stone onto the conveyor belt, since you can't carry it up the ladder. We'll then want to place it on this rotor platform and stand to the side and use the gust bellows to move it to the other end of the room. You will need to be on the ledge here to hold this switch down while you do it. When it's at the other end of the track, it should remove a barricade here so we can shoot this eye switch. Then we'll bring it into the next section. We can open a shortcut gate here like we did in the last room as well. Toss it into the next conveyor belt then while it's moving, and you can strike the 5 eye switches along the wall as the timeshift area of effect removes the barricades. Just watch out as it also revives these BMOS. Doing so correctly should unlock this gate to the next control panel. You can shuffle the rooms again here, so I recommend next shuffling it into this configuration so that we have a clear path towards that treasure chest. Okay, we can cut back through the Skyview room quickly and head back the way we came, and we should enter the Earth Temple themed room. The path here is gated shut, but we can head through this crawl space and into a side alcove. Then roll this bomb to blow up some rocks and do some more crawling. We'll find an underground section like the fire sanctuary had, where we can press this button and open the gate. Now head back to where we came from and pass into this section of the room and battle this Lizalfos. There's a stone tablet here which gives us a hint to hit 3 gemstones in order from lowest to highest. We'll find a basket statue here which we can toss a bomb into to reveal one of these gemstones. We'll want to roll a bomb down this slope into the lower one, which may take a few tries to get the angle right. Then head down to that lowest switch and climb the vines above up to this alcove. You can cut all these trees with some well-placed skyward strikes, then use the beetle to pick up this bomb and drop it into the last statue basket. Okay, just remember the hint from that stone tablet and strike the 3 stones in order: lowest, middle, highest. This will open a gate which we can head through to find another underground tunnel. You can hit this bomb flower over twice, you just have to be quick, then hit this button to move that same gate as before, which reveals a new path to another underground section. We have to fight a pair of Moldorm here, which, just like before, we can defeat by slapping their butts. Once they're defeated, we can emerge at the control panel, and we can open the shortcut gate just like the other rooms here as well. But don't worry about using the control panel itself just yet. Instead, let's head into the next room. This room seems to be modeled after the interior of the giant tree in Faron Woods, and marks the dungeon's mid-boss. This is Dreadfuse, though he may as well be Skirvo 2.0. His attack pattern is identical, except that he's a lefty. Stab him repeatedly to knock him back to the ledge, and just mind the timing of your shield parries. Once he's defeated, we can hookshot across the gap and open this chest to get ourselves a key. There's another control panel here, and you can shuffle some rooms if you'd like, but make sure to keep that green Triforce room there to the left of the current room and head into the door. We should emerge into a room modeled after the basement of the Ancient Cistern. Fi will remark that there's an emblem of the goddess Faror in the room, but the section of that room is gated shut. Instead, let's spend that key we just got on the locked door here. This will take us into a sort of gauntlet of combat challenges. First up is a narrow bridge with some moblins. If you're not sure how to defeat these guys reliably in such a small area, here's my tactic. You can dash at them and climb their shields to jump over their heads. They have a pretty slow reaction time, so do this to both and you should end up behind them. Now you'll have an opening to unleash a flurry of attacks, which with our fully upgraded Master Sword should be enough to defeat them right there. Do this to both and the next door unlocks. This next section has a number of Bokoblin archers. You're safest staying near the door and picking most of them off with your bow. You can head further in to finish the rest of the archers, and you'll have to fight a few Bokoblins goblins with swords, as well as a pair of Stalfos. The next door opens, behind which is a Stalfos with 4 arms, protected by a swarm of cursed bokoblins. The zombie bokos are pretty slow, so I suggest keeping your focus on the Stalfos instead, and if any of them get close to you, just do a quick spin attack to disperse them. As for the Stalfos, again, try to deal as many directional slashes as you can when he leaves an opening, and a properly executed parry will momentarily disarm him, opening him up to attack. Once all the enemies are defeated, the next door opens and we'll find the Mark of Furore. Striking our sword into the crest will transport us into this ethereal room that I believe to be within the sacred realm itself. In this room, we'll find the Triforce of Courage, ours for the taking. 1 down, 2 to go. Now, if you arranged the rooms while in that mid-boss room, then you should emerge through the next door and back into the Earth Temple room. From here, we can once more rearrange the panels. While it's possible from here to arrange the panels to enter this red Triforce room, doing so will only take us to a dead end. So instead, let's do some more shuffling and arrange it so that the blue Triforce room, which has only 1 door, is next to us here. Then head through the door. We'll now be in a room that plays the Sandship music, but doesn't really share any of the architecture of the ship itself, being modeled more after the Lanayru mines and pirate stronghold. There's another timeshift orb in this room, which we can carry around, and we'll actually find a mark on the ground here that acts as a hint for where to set it down. This will remove this barricade on the wall, which was blocking an eye switch, which opens this gate. Now let's take the timeshift stone with us into that hall and set it down so that it is right before this rock barrier that emerges, as that will block our line of sight. Now we can stand on this switch to open a hatch in front of an eye switch, which we can shoot through this ventilation fan. Easy. This opens a gate by where the Mark of Lanayru is. So let's take the timeshift stone and set it down right here so that it causes this stone platform to appear, but also removes this barricade. Hook shot to the ledge and plunge your sword into the crest of Lanayru to enter the sacred realm again. This time, we'll find the Triforce of Wisdom. Okay, there's only 1 door and no control panel here, so all we can do is head back into the previous room and use the panel once more. We've been in every room now, but we just need to arrange the rooms so that we can enter that red Triforce room from the east side. It's going to take a lot of shuffling these panels around to do so, and you may even have to arrange it partially, then move to a different room to finish arranging it. That's what worked for me. Entering this room, which is themed after the Fire Sanctuary, from the eastern door will take us into what is probably the most boring room in the dungeon. We'll need to use these water fruit to create platforms and ride the lava flow. There's some switches we need to hit to turn the flow on or off in some sections, and then jump to the next platform, which is all well and good, but the current is so slow, so you'll just spend a lot of time standing here. They throw some keys at you to mix things up, but these are keys. They are so easy to deal with that they may as well just not be there. Once more entering the sacred realm, we'll find the final piece, the Triforce of Power. Once we have all 3 pieces, we'll actually be teleported to outside the dungeon, concluding our time in Skykeep. We'll be here on the statue of the goddess, just like the start of the game, but now with the complete Triforce before us, allowing us the opportunity to wish on it. With this, we can finally make our wish to destroy Demise once and for all, which is accomplished as the entire Isle of the Goddess is plunged to the surface, with the spiral structure of Skykeep nestling perfectly in the sealed grounds, crushing the imprisoned just as it starts to rise from its seal. The threat of Demise is eradicated, and the Isle of the Goddess just happens to fit perfectly in its spot here, connecting to the sealed temple. We have finally achieved our goals, and can wake Zelda from her slumber. With Demise eradicated, there's no need to keep the seal intact. Groose is happy, the old lady is happy, all is well at last. Except Girahim interrupts our happy moment. He catches us off guard, knocking us aside. See, Girahim realizes one thing. His master Demise may now be dead in the present day, but here is the gate of time, and in the past, he lives yet. So, he kicks Groose and the old lady aside and hauls Zelda back in time, intent on using her as a sacrifice to revive Demise in the past. So there's only one thing left to do: pursue Girahim through time and put an end to this. So, Skykeep doesn't really have a boss fight of its own per se, since it all happens here, but this does take us right into the game's finale, with a series of battles that for the purpose of this video will act as the dungeon boss and allow us to conclude Skyward Sword. First is the Horde battle. When we emerge into the sealed grounds of the past, Girahim will have already begun his ritual to use Zelda's soul to revive Demise. He's set up barriers to slow us down and summoned a horde of bokoblins to try and halt our progress. The thing is that with our upgraded sword, we are so much more powerful than at the start of the game, so we can basically swat aside nearly all of the enemies here. This isn't too hard, but boy is it fun to just plow through all of these baddies like this. There's a few instances where they shake things up a bit with other enemies, such as these moblins, but for the most part, we're gonna be just mowing down hordes and hordes of bokoblins. It almost feels like this battle alone was the inspiration behind the entirety of Hyrule Warriors. Once we reach the bottom of the pit, Girahim will get fed up and try to face us himself. He'll raise a platform to battle on, and he reveals his true form to us, a weapon without mercy and full of rage. Our ongoing rivalry with Girahim has nearly reached its conclusion, with our third and final duel against him, and ironically, it's the easiest of the three fights. But I believe this to be intentional. This whole section of the game feels like it was designed just to show just how strong Link has become. During the fight, you can slash at Girahim to knock him back towards the platform's edge, then knock him off and deliver a fatal blow to him, leaping to the platform below and plunging the Master Sword into his chest. As you do, he'll take noticeable battle damage on his chest. The gem here is his weak spot. He'll also deliver some pretty direct blows to you with punches and kicks, and he'll try to catch your sword, but aim your slashes between his defenses, knock him down, and lunge down onto him. After a few of these fatal blows, we'll reach the bottom of the pit, but the fight isn't over. Girahim will stand and draw a sword. You can parry his strikes, or what you can do is slash repeatedly at him to literally just knock the sword out of his hand and strike his weak point. After a few hits, he'll summon an even larger sword, but the strategy is the same. You can slice right through his blade and stab him in the chest. This final Girahim battle may be easier than the previous ones, but only to show us just how much stronger we are. The first time we encountered him, he was toying with us, could catch our sword mid-swipe, and was just hard to land a hit on. The second fight was largely the same, but was a far more aggressive battle. But now, Girahim is going all out, and we are able to just slice through his defenses, disarm him, and destroy his great sword. People may complain about having to fight him so many times in this game, but this battle, this payoff, makes it all worth it to me. Once he's defeated, he'll express his frustration one last time at not being able to best us, but then his anger turns to joy. The ritual continued while we dueled and is now complete. His master is revived, and the imprisoned consumes Zelda's soul. The Demon King Demise now stands before us in his true form. Girahim welcomes his master back, and Demise, saying nothing, retrieves his weapon. Yeah, if you haven't figured it out yet, Girahim is a sword spirit much the same as Fi. He is literally Demise's sword. Demise takes a moment to even notice that Link is there, but then, as the hero prepares to stand against him, he finds himself more intrigued than threatened, having never seen a human not fear him. Demise has some fantastic dialogue here, but here's the gist. He challenges you to stand against him, creating a realm for the purposes of our battle. He says he's already waited a millennia to conquer the world, he can wait a few more minutes just to kill us. So this is it, the final battle. Two swords with spirits wielded by their masters in a one-on-one duel to the death. Visually, I just love Demise's design here. It takes the scaly, veiny elements we saw in The Imprisoned, but gives him a far more threatening air about him. He's cool, composed, and threatening. Also worth noting is the scar on his forehead where the ceiling spike had been. It's a nice touch. He will wield an enormous sword that appears as a dark counterpart to our own. In some ways, with the epic score, the water at our feet, and this sword fight, it does remind me of the final battle from Wind Waker, but this is certainly a battle of its own. Demise will block many of our attacks, but if you're persistent, you can still break through his defenses and even block his attacks with your shield. All you really can do is try your best to get around his blocks and be persistent. After enough hits, he'll switch things up a bit. He'll call down a thunderstorm and use bolts of lightning to charge his sword with skyward strikes. However, we can now do the same, using the Master Sword as a lightning rod and launching great beams of energy at him. If you successfully land a hit on him with this, you can stun him with the electricity, which opens him up for attack, though he will also be vulnerable while charging his own sword. Where the battle with Girahim was easy by design, this one, not so much. Demise always gives me a hard time, as he should. He's as difficult as you'd hope a final boss to be, and I love it. It's genuinely difficult to get past his defenses even when changing tactics quickly. He just reacts so instantly. After hitting him enough, he'll be knocked back, allowing us to try a fatal blow. The first will always miss, but try again and you'll prevail. Link will leap into the air, catching a bolt of lightning with his sword before plunging it into Demise, ending the battle. There's a lot of post-game cutscenes that go on here. Demise curses us, everyone says their goodbye, we leave the Master Sword, the old lady is actually Impa, who stays in the past, and Zelda decides to stay on the surface with Link to watch over the Triforce, founding the Kingdom of Hyrule. So, that's the end of Skyward Sword. We finished the origin story for so much in the series. Overall, Skykeep is a short dungeon, but it serves as a great puzzle-based final dungeon and leads us right into one of the greatest and most climactic finales in the series. While it's not my favorite dungeon either, I can't deny how well it uses Link's inventory and integrates the puzzles found throughout the entire game into one place. And I just love how the dungeon itself is the puzzle. So brilliant. The reused dungeon assets could have been better, but the unique rooms are so wonderful visually, and being able to step into what I believe to be the Sacred Realm and obtain the Triforce, a relic that plays such significance to the series as a whole, is all just so fantastic. Finishing off Girahim and battling Demise is the perfect ending for this game. It's wonderfully cinematic and climactic in all the best ways. I'd like to thank you for watching this video, and special thanks goes out to my channel members here on YouTube, as well as my supporters on Patreon. So thank you to Greymage, Brenda, Tetra, Justin, Midnight Naomi, Bunny, Stefan, Avery, and their ATHDs, and all of the other folks whose names you're seeing on screen right now. You all are awesome. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day. Bye-bye.